Good evening, night owls, and welcome to Whisper Crowley, the place where stories linger long after the lights go out. Tonight, we prepared chilling tales paired with the soothing sound of rain to ignite your imagination and make your heart race. If you feel the cold creeping in, tap that like button. It helps keep the shadows alive. Tell us in the comments where you're listening from or share the scariest moment that sent shivers down your spine. Don't forget to subscribe. You wouldn't want to miss what lurks in the darkness ahead. Mysterious Island in California. I had always been drawn to the sea, even as a child. The way the waves crashed against the jagged rocks, the constant hum of the ocean, there was something almost hypnotic about it. But today, as I stood on the edge of the California coast, looking out over the gray expanse of water, something felt off. The fog rolled in thick and heavy, shrouding everything in its path, until the horizon disappeared entirely. I pulled my jacket tighter around me, shivering not from the cold but from the unsettling silence that seemed to hang in the air. The usual sounds, the cries of seagulls, the rush of the waves, had disappeared, swallowed by the thickening mist. It felt as if the world itself was holding its breath, waiting for something. I was here for a reason, though. I had always wanted to explore the California coast, and I heard about this mysterious island that appeared on foggy mornings like this one. The locals talked about it in hushed voices, their eyes darting nervously whenever it was mentioned. Some said it was a mirage, a trick of the mind. Others claimed it was cursed, a place where those who set foot on it would disappear, never to be seen again. The island, the old fisherman had said to me just yesterday, his voice low and gravelly, only shows itself when the fog's thick enough. If you see it, don't go near it. You don't want to know what happens to those who do. I didn't believe in superstitions. There was always a rational explanation for everything. Maybe the fog created an illusion, or perhaps the island was real, but just so isolated that no one ever turned to tell the story. Still, the story stuck with me, rattling around in my mind as I stood there on the dock, staring into the thick mist. A small boat bobbed gently in the water beside me, waiting. It was nothing special, just a worn vessel with a motor that sounded as if it might give out at any moment. But it was mine for the day. I had plans to explore the coastline, to get away from the hustle of everyday life. The sea had always been a place where I could clear my head. I shoved the troubling thoughts aside and climbed into the boat, starting the engine with a low hum. The boat cut through the water with ease, leaving the shore behind as I ventured further into the fog. My only company was the muffled sound of the motor and the faint sloshing of the waves against the sides of the boat. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, though. It was absurd, of course. The fog, thick as it was, could easily obscure any view of the shore. But I glanced over my shoulder anyway, half expecting to see someone standing there, waiting. Nothing. Just the endless expanse of gray. The mist seemed to grow denser as I moved forward, the air heavier, pressing against me like an unseen weight. My boat seemed to glide without effort, yet the silence in the fog was deafening. I glanced down at the water, dark, almost black in the absence of light, and felt a strange unease twist in my stomach. The stories of the island weren't something I had given much thought to before, but now, with the fog pressing in around me, they seemed more real, more possible. And then, there it was. A silhouette. Faint at first, like a shadow peeking through the mist. But as I steered the boat closer, it became clearer, a shape, an outline of land rising from the water. The island. It shouldn't have been here. Not today. Not in this fog. I stared at it, my heart pounding in my chest. The island was not supposed to appear this far from the shore. I had read the stories, but now I was seeing it firsthand, and a chill ran down my spine. The island was there, waiting for me. I shook my head, trying to push the unsettling thoughts away. It was just fog. Just a trick of the light. My hands tightened on the boat's wheel as I made my way further into the water, determined to shake off the growing sense of unease. The stories had always been just that, stories. I wasn't going to let a little fog stop me from exploring. The boat surged forward, its engine cutting through the water with a steady hum. But the farther I went, the thicker the fog became. It swallowed the coastline behind me until I could no longer make out the distant shore. The world had narrowed, reduced to only the faint shape of the boat, the sound of the motor, and the eerie silence that clung to the water. I tried to ignore the growing pressure in my chest, that unshakable feeling that something wasn't right. The fog, which had been a soft, almost ethereal haze at first, was now dense, thickening by the minute, making it difficult to see more than a few feet in front of me. The boat seemed to glide effortlessly through the water, but the silence was unbearable. There was no wind, no crash of waves against the hull, only the low hum of the motor and the occasional faint creak of the boat as it cut through the water. It was as though the world had gone still, frozen in time. I glanced behind me again, half expecting to see the shore fading into nothingness, but all I could see was the gray mist, closing in, suffocating the horizon. It was hard to tell how far I'd traveled, how much time had passed. I looked ahead, squinting through the fog. The island was still there, looming in the distance like some spectral presence, just beyond the reach of the boat's engine. It didn't seem to be getting closer, yet it was always in sight, like a phantom in the mist. Suddenly, a soft sound, barely perceptible, echoed through the fog. I froze, straining to listen. It wasn't the sound of waves or wind, but something else. A faint whisper of movement, like something shifting in the water. My heart skipped a beat. I tried to tell myself it was nothing, just the noise of the boat, the water, maybe even my own mind playing tricks. But the feeling of being watched, that strange, pricking sensation at the back of my neck, hadn't gone away. It only intensified. I turned the wheel, steering the boat to the left in an attempt to clear the fog, to regain some sense of direction. But it was no use. The fog seemed to be closing in faster than I could move, thickening around me like some dark curtain drawn tight. The silence grew deeper, and for a moment, I thought I heard something else, footsteps, soft and rhythmic, as if someone was walking alongside the boat, just out of sight. I blinked rapidly, trying to shake the feeling. I was being ridiculous. It was just the fog. I had to focus. Keep moving. The boat continued to cut through the thickening mist, but with each passing moment, the world around me seemed to shrink. It was hard to tell if it had been minutes or hours since I had first seen the island on the horizon. Time felt warped, suspended. I could feel the tension in my chest, my breath coming faster as the fog swallowed me whole. The air was heavy now, thicker than before, as if the world itself was pressing down on me. The boat's engine sputtered slightly, and I twisted the throttle, trying to push it forward, to break through. But the more I tried, the more the fog seemed to pull me in. The island loomed ahead, closer now. Too close. It was no longer a distant shadow in the mist, it was real, its jagged edges cutting through the gray fog like a dark monument. And something about it, something in the way it seemed to rise from the water, felt wrong. I was getting too close, I realized. Too close to something I didn't understand, something I couldn't explain. The stories echoed in my mind once more, and I wondered, for the first time, if there was any truth to them at all. The fog pressed in around me, thickening, suffocating, as if the world itself was being swallowed whole. My eyes strained against the grayness, but the boat moved steadily, its engine humming, a small force in an endless, empty void. The island was so close now that I could see the rocky shoreline jutting from the mist, jagged and uneven, like teeth in the mouth of some great beast. But it was the silence that unsettled me the most. There were no birds, no distant sounds of the shore, nothing. Only the soft creak of the boat's hull and the steady hum of the engine. Even the water beneath me seemed to have quieted, as though it were holding its breath. I glanced over the edge of the boat, watching the murky water below. There was a strange quality to it, too still, too dark. I could barely make out the faint ripples caused by the boat's movement. The waves should have been bigger, louder. But there was nothing. The water felt alive, like something was watching from below, waiting. And then I heard it. At first, it was barely a sound, just a whispering, almost imperceptible. A rustle, like the brush of a cloth against a surface. I froze, straining my ears. The sound seemed to come from all around me, shifting through the mist, elusive, fleeting. It was a soft, irregular noise, like someone, or something, was walking just behind me, their steps muffled by the fog. My breath caught in my throat, and I looked over my shoulder, but there was nothing. Just the endless gray, the boat gently cutting through the water, and the oppressive silence. My heart rate quickened, but I told myself it was just the fog playing tricks on me. The wind could have shifted, or maybe it was the boat's engine making strange noises. I tried to focus on the island ahead, telling myself it was just another part of the journey. But the sound persisted, now slightly louder, like faint whispers carried by the wind. There was no rhythm to it, no clear direction. It came from everywhere and nowhere all at once. I shook my head, trying to push the thought away. It's just the fog, I muttered to myself. Nothing else. But I couldn't shake the feeling of being utterly alone, despite the noise. The boat, the water, the fog, it all felt isolating, as if I were the only person in the world, cut off from everything. The distance between me and the shore felt immense now, and the island ahead loomed like some forgotten place, a relic of another time. I realized with a start that I hadn't seen another boat in hours. No one was out here with me. No one but the mist and the silent water. The realization struck me harder than I expected, the weight of isolation pressing against my chest, squeezing the air from my lungs. I tried to focus on the boat, on the steady hum of the engine beneath me, but the silence around me was deafening, broken only by that strange whispering. It felt like the sound was closing in, wrapping itself around me, drawing me further into the fog, further from the shore. I gripped the boat's wheel tighter, feeling the coldness of the metal seeping into my skin. It was as if the fog itself was alive, pushing me toward the island. I turned my head again, searching for some sign of life, anything to break the oppressive solitude. But the fog, thick as ever, gave no answer. The mist had swallowed everything. The island was almost within reach now, the jagged rocks of its shore looming in the mist like a dark promise. But something inside me, some primal instinct, screamed at me to turn back. Something about the way the island sat there, waiting, made my blood run cold. But the strange, soft rustling noises continued, ever present, just beyond my hearing. Every time I thought I could ignore it, the sound would return, closer, louder, more distinct. It was as if the island itself was calling to me. I forced myself to focus, trying to convince myself that there was nothing to fear, that the fog was just fog, and the noises were just the natural sounds of the world around me. But no matter how much I tried to rationalize it, the uneasy sensation in my gut wouldn't fade. The Whispers in the fog, the strange silence, the feeling of being watched, it all pointed to one thing: I was alone. More alone than I had ever been. And the island, the dark, ominous island, was waiting. I felt a cold shiver run down my spine as I stared ahead, my eyes straining to make sense of what I was seeing. The fog, thick and suffocating, was starting to dissipate slightly, but it left behind an eerie, distorted view of the world. The horizon was still mostly veiled, but something had changed. A shape, barely perceptible at first, was starting to take form in the distance. I blinked hard, leaning forward over the edge of the boat. Was it land? It was so faint, like a shadow clinging to the edge of the world. For a moment, I convinced myself it was just the fog playing tricks, the mist shifting and warping in the light. But then it solidified just enough for me to see something jagged, unnatural, cutting through the gray like the spine of some forgotten beast. My heart skipped a beat. The outline of land, no, not land, but something more, loomed in the distance. It was too far for me to make out clearly, but the jagged edges and the way it seemed to rise from the water, shrouded in mist, felt wrong. The island, the one from the stories, was real. It couldn't be. I gripped the boat's wheel tighter, my palms slick with sweat. The world around me was silent, oppressive, as the boat drifted closer. The outline of land grew clearer, and the vague, unfamiliar shape of it made my pulse quicken. Was it the island I had heard about? The one that appeared only on foggy mornings, when the mist was thick enough to make anyone question their sanity? The stories I'd heard from the locals, from the fishermen who spoke in hushed tones, flooded my mind. The island that appeared, only to vanish again, along with the people who ventured onto it. I had dismissed them at first, thinking it was just superstition, the fears of a small coastal town built on ancient myths. But now, seeing the silhouette of something that didn't belong, I couldn't help but wonder. I couldn't be sure, of course. The fog was still thick, still swirling around me, warping everything it touched. It could have been another part of the coastline, some rock formation hidden in the mist. Or it could be nothing at all, a mirage created by my mind. But the more I looked, the more it seemed undeniable. The shape was too distinct, too unnatural. The island, if it was indeed the island, was closer now, the dark rocks and sharp outlines of its shore more visible, though still barely perceptible through the thick fog. It was rising out of the water like some ancient monument, shrouded in a veil that made it appear almost otherworldly. I swallowed hard, my breath coming faster. The air around me felt colder now, the heavy mist pressing on every side, wrapping itself around me like a suffocating blanket. A sudden unease gripped me, tightening around my chest. I had heard the stories, but nothing had prepared me for the sheer presence of it. The island, if it was even that, seemed to pull at something deep within me, like a force beyond my understanding. A part of me wanted to turn back, to flee from whatever this was, but another part, the part that had always craved adventure, pulled me forward. The stories, the whispers of the island, were right in front of me now. Was this fate? Or something else? I forced myself to take a deep breath, steadying my hands on the wheel. The boat continued to drift toward the island, or what I thought was the island. The fog seemed to draw me in, as if the very air around me was thick with secrets, with things that had been waiting to be uncovered. But as I drew nearer, I noticed something else. A faint flicker of movement in the fog, a shadow that didn't quite belong. My pulse quickened. Was it another person? Or something else? The thought made my skin crawl, but I couldn't look away. The island was closer now, the shape clearer, rising out of the mist like some forgotten place, just waiting for me to get closer. to make the decision. I glanced back at the shore one last time, but it was lost in the fog, swallowed by the very thing that was pulling me forward. I was alone now, out here in the middle of the fog, on a course toward an island I wasn't sure I even believed in. But it was there. And it was waiting for me. The boat cut through the water with steady force, but my mind was far from steady. The island loomed ahead now, almost tangible, and despite the unease curling in my stomach, a strange compulsion to approach it only grew stronger. I told myself it was curiosity, the need to understand, to solve the mystery that had haunted this place for so long. The fog was so thick now, I could hardly see more than a few feet in front of me. The world felt narrowed, as though I were in a tunnel, and the island was the only destination. The jagged outline of the island was now visible, its rocky cliffs rising from the water like black teeth. They pierced the gray sky, dark against the shifting mist. There was something unearthingly stark about it. The island seemed to be waiting, as if it knew I was coming. I shook my head, trying to clear the growing dread. I had no reason to be scared, no reason to believe in the stories. But something deep within me, some primal instinct, whispered that this place was not like any other. It wasn't just an island, it was something else. And it wasn't offering me a warm welcome. As the boat approached, I could see more details, craggy rocks, twisted trees jutting out of the shore, and an eerie, unnatural stillness that hung in the air. It felt wrong, out of place, as if the island existed outside the natural order. The fog, which had once felt soft and disorienting, now pressed against the boat like a wall, as though it didn't want me to go any further. I could almost hear it, like a faint murmur in the distance, urging me to turn back. But I didn't. I couldn't. I pushed the throttle forward, increasing the boat's speed, and the mist parted just enough for me to make out the narrow inlet ahead, a small cove that seemed to beckon me. My hands trembled slightly as I steered the boat toward it. Despite the fear gnawing at my insides, there was something compelling me, something I couldn't resist. The engine hummed louder, the boat cutting through the increasingly thick fog with an unsettling determination. The air had grown colder, the mist more oppressive, pressing down on the boat from every direction. My breath came in shallow gasps, clouding in the air, as if the atmosphere itself was alive with some unspoken tension. I looked ahead, but the closer I got, the harder it was to see. The fog was thick now, so dense that it felt like I was driving through a blanket of cotton, and yet it seemed to shimmer with an almost unnatural energy. The island, once clear in the distance, now seemed to be part of the fog itself. Its edges blurred, and I couldn't tell where the land ended and the mist began. A strange, unfamiliar sensation crept up my spine. It was as though the fog was no longer just an environmental factor, it was alive. A sentient presence, pulling me forward, urging me deeper into its grip. The air tasted stale, like old, damp earth, and I couldn't shake the feeling that the island was holding its breath, waiting for me to arrive. I had to keep going. I had to see it for myself, to know what this place was, to understand why it had drawn me in. The boat slowly entered the cove, and I could feel the change in the water, smoother, almost too still. The engine sputtered slightly, and I twisted the throttle to keep it steady. The shore was close now, the rocky ground rising up to meet me, and there was a strange noise beneath the boat, a soft scraping sound as if something was moving just below the surface. I quickly glanced down, but the water was as dark and impenetrable as ever, no sign of life, nothing to explain it. Just more silence. I didn't know why, but I felt a deep sense of urgency now. I had to step onto the island. I had to find out what was hidden here. It was more than curiosity. It was as if the island had been waiting for me, had been calling to me. I cut the engine, letting the boat drift closer to the shore. The fog had thickened so much that I could barely see the land in front of me anymore. All I could hear was the soft lapping of the water against the boat and the distant, unsettling sound of something. I hesitated for only a moment, but that hesitation felt like a lifetime. My fingers were numb from gripping the edge of the boat, but I took a deep breath and finally stood, the boat rocking gently as I prepared to step onto the island. The island, with its eerie presence, was waiting. But as I turned toward the shore, the fog closed in around me, thicker than ever. And I realized with a start, it wasn't just the fog that was closing in. The island was closing in too. It wasn't just a place. It was alive. It was a trap, and I had just walked straight into it. The moment my foot touched the rocky shore, the air seemed to shift. The fog, which had surrounded me on the boat, now seemed to cling to the island itself, wrapping its dense tendrils around me. I could barely see more than a few feet in front of me, the mist swallowing up any hope of clarity. The land beneath my feet was uneven, jagged, but solid enough to support my weight. The island felt cold, lifeless, as if it hadn't been touched by human presence in years. I hesitated, the unsettling silence settling over me like a thick blanket. The soft crunch of gravel underfoot was the only sound, and even that felt unnervingly loud in the stillness. I scanned my surroundings, trying to get a sense of the place. The island, or whatever this place was, seemed to stretch endlessly in front of me, shrouded in the ever-present fog. The shoreline was jagged and irregular, with sharp rocks that jutted out at angles, as though the earth had been torn apart long ago. There was no sign of life, no birds, no animals, not even the sound of insects buzzing in the air. It was as if the island existed in some isolated vacuum, removed from the world entirely. But there was something more to it. Something that felt wrong. I stepped further onto the island, the mist swirling around me as if it were alive, brushing against my skin like fingers. As I moved, I began to notice things, strange things, hidden within the fog's embrace. To my left, a cluster of twisted, gnarled trees stood in what appeared to be a small grove. Their trunks were blackened and contorted, the branches reaching toward the sky like skeletal arms. There were no leaves, only jagged stubs, as if the trees had been stripped of life by some unseen force. Their shadows twisted and distorted in the mist, creating an unsettling dance of shapes that seemed to flicker with every movement of the fog. I quickly turned my gaze away, unease gnawing at the back of my mind. Straight ahead, the ground rose in an uneven hill, dotted with strange rock formations that didn't seem natural. The rocks were large, smooth in places, but carved with bizarre symbols I didn't recognize, ancient and worn, as if they had been etched into the stone long before any human set foot here. The shapes seemed to shimmer in the mist, teasing me with their cryptic designs. My breath caught in my throat as I stared at the rocks. It felt like they were watching me. No, not just the rocks, but the island itself. I couldn't explain it, but there was an odd sense of awareness in the air, as if the land knew I had arrived, as if it was waiting for something. Or someone. A chill ran down my spine as I took a few steps toward the rocks, my boots crunching against the gravel. The fog was thick, and with each step, it felt like the island was slowly tightening its grip on me. The silence was suffocating, and the further I moved, the more I felt the weight of something unseen pressing in from all sides. I stopped, heart racing, trying to shake the feeling of being watched. But the island was silent, save for the wind whispering through the mist, carrying with it an odd, almost imperceptible hum. It was like a far-off vibration, too faint to pinpoint, but undeniably present. The sound, or whatever it was, seemed to come from all directions, like a low, distant murmur that never fully reached my ears. I rubbed my eyes, as if trying to rid myself of the eerie sensation. This was madness, wasn't it? There was no reason to feel like this, no reason to let the strange sights and sounds of the island make me feel so small, so insignificant. But then I noticed something else. To my right, just barely visible through the fog, was what appeared to be an old building, an abandoned structure, half hidden by the mist. It was small, crumbling, its walls withered by time. I couldn't make out any details, but there was something distinctly human about it, an unnatural presence in a place so devoid of life. I knew I had to investigate. With every step I took, the fog seemed to press closer, as if the island were alive, urging me forward. I couldn't explain it, but it felt like the island was holding its breath, waiting for me to uncover its secrets. And despite every instinct in my body telling me to turn around and leave, I felt drawn to it, unable to resist the pull of the unknown. I moved toward the building, my footsteps echoing in the quiet. The mist clung to me, cold and wet against my skin. The air was still, but it felt charged, as though something was about to happen. And then, as I reached the edge of the building, I heard it, a faint rustling sound, as if something had moved just beyond my sight. My heart skipped a beat, and I stopped in my tracks, my breath catching in my throat. For a moment, everything was still. The fog, the rocks, the twisted trees, it all seemed to hold its breath. And then the rustling came again, louder this time. I wasn't alone on this island. I hesitated, my heart thudding in my chest, as I stood before the crumbling structure. The rustling sound had stopped, but the air was charged with an unsettling energy. It felt like I wasn't alone, like someone, or something, was watching my every move. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end, and a cold shiver crawled down my spine. Despite the overwhelming urge to run, I stepped forward, my boots crunching on the gravel beneath me. The fog thickened, swallowing the landscape in its oppressive grasp, but I could still make out the faint outline of the building. It was small, barely more than a hut, but the walls were weathered and cracked, like it had been abandoned for years, maybe even centuries. The kind of place that might hold forgotten secrets or stories long lost to time. I reached the entrance, a doorway without a door, just an empty frame. The inside was dark, the air stale with the scent of rot. I could barely make out the details within, but there was something odd about the way the shadows moved. I paused for a moment, straining my eyes, wondering if I had seen something shift in the darkness, but there was nothing. Only the oppressive silence. Reluctantly, I stepped inside. The floor was uneven, covered in patches of moss and grime. My footsteps echoed strangely in the hollow space. I scanned the interior quickly, noting the absence of furniture, the bare walls cracked and covered in strange symbols. Symbols etched into the wood and stone, worn away by years of neglect. Some of them were circular, like spirals, others jagged, sharp, and irregular. They seemed to pulse faintly, as though they were alive, shifting just out of the corner of my vision. A chill ran through me. I turned toward the far wall, where something caught my eye. A faded, ancient tapestry hung crookedly, barely held together by the decaying nails that still pierced the wall. The fabric, threadbare and stained, depicted a scene that made my blood run cold. It was an image of the island, though the island in the tapestry looked wrong. It was depicted as a monstrous, twisted version of itself, with jagged rocks that stretched impossibly high into the sky, and an ocean swirling around it like a vortex. In the center of the scene was a dark figure, indistinct but clearly human, standing on the shore, facing something monstrous. I didn't want to touch it, but my eyes were drawn to the figure in the tapestry. The longer I looked, the more I felt like it was staring back at me. It seemed to shift, moving within the fabric, the outlines of its features growing more distinct with every passing second. I blinked and stepped back, my pulse quickening. The island was watching me. I was sure of it now. I turned away from the tapestry, my breath coming in shallow gasps. The feeling of being watched only grew stronger as I moved through the structure. There were no windows, but it felt like eyes were following me from every corner, every shadow. I couldn't shake the sensation. It was like the very air had turned hostile, pressing in around me with an almost tangible weight. I stepped back out into the fog, desperate for fresh air, but the outside world didn't offer me any relief. The island felt even more oppressive now, as if it were alive, breathing, waiting. I glanced over my shoulder, certain that something was following me, but the entrance to the building remained empty, still. I turned my attention back to the surrounding area. The fog had thickened even further, and now it seemed to form shapes within it. At first, I thought I was imagining things, but as I squinted through the mist, I saw them clearly, figures. Shadows, flitting just out of sight, moving between the trees and rocks like whispers in the fog. They didn't seem to have any form, just dark, shifting masses that darted in and out of view. My heart hammered in my chest as I stepped backward. There was no mistaking it, someone, or something, was here with me. Watching. I forced myself to take a breath, trying to steady my shaking hands. I needed to explore more. I needed to understand what this place was. But the unease gnawing at me was overwhelming. I glanced around, searching for anything that could explain the feeling of being hunted. The fog, the rustling sound, the strange symbols, they all pointed to something ancient, something beyond comprehension. I noticed something on the ground near the building, footprints. They were faint, half hidden by the fog, but they were there, leading off into the mist, disappearing into the unknown. My mind screamed at me to follow them, to understand who, or what, had left them behind. But another voice, a quieter, more insistent voice, urged me to turn back. To leave while I still had the chance. I couldn't. Something deep inside me told me that if I left now, I would never understand what had drawn me here. The island's secrets, it was all connected. But at that moment, I couldn't tell if it was curiosity or something darker, something that had been planted in my mind by the island itself. I took a step forward, my eyes fixed on the footprints. The sense of being watched was now overwhelming, and the air felt charged, like electricity humming through the fog. I could hear the distant rustling again, and I felt it, an unmistakable presence, drawing closer. I wasn't alone. And whatever was here, whatever had watched me, wasn't going to let me leave easily. I took a few more steps forward, the fog wrapping tighter around me, its dampness seeping into my bones. Every sound, every breath, seemed magnified in the oppressive silence. The only movement was the shifting of the mist, swirling in patterns that seemed almost deliberate, as though the island itself were alive and watching. I heard it then, a low, distant sound that seemed to vibrate in the very air. It started as a soft rustling, like leaves shifting in the wind, but it grew louder, sharper. A faint, echoing crack, followed by a deeper, almost guttural noise, like a low growl. I froze. The hair on the back of my neck stood on end. I scanned the dense forest around me, my eyes darting between the twisted trees, their gnarled branches clawing at the sky like the hands of long-dead giants. The fog made it hard to see more than a few feet ahead, but I could feel something, someone, moving within the trees. The growl wasn't just in my head. It was real. The island was alive with it. The sound came again, this time closer, sharper. It reverberated through my chest, making my heart race. The trees seemed to shudder, their branches creaking as if in response, like they were reacting to the noise, or to me. I wanted to run. Every instinct screamed at me to turn back, to leave this cursed place before whatever was lurking in the fog found me. But something in my gut told me I needed to understand it. I couldn't turn away, not now. With trembling hands, I reached for the flashlight in my pack and clicked it on. The beam of light cut through the mist in front of me, illuminating nothing but the empty ground. I hesitated, taking in the silence once again. There was no rustling in the trees now. No sounds of movement, only the distant hum of the fog, as if the island itself were holding its breath. I stood there for a moment, my eyes scanning the surroundings, feeling a creeping dread settle over me. Every crack in the fog, every shift in the shadows, felt like it was leading me deeper into something I couldn't control. I forced myself to move, pushing forward toward the forest. The eerie silence seemed to follow me, clinging to my every step. The growl from earlier was gone, replaced by an unsettling quiet, the kind that makes you feel as though you're being watched by something just out of sight. It wasn't the usual fear of being lost in an unfamiliar place. No, this was something far darker, something that twisted inside my chest, gnawing at my thoughts. The trees ahead were closer now, their trunks rising like dark sentinels, their branches tangled and dense, casting long, jagged shadows that reached out like fingers. I stepped off the beaten path, the ground beneath me shifting from gravel to dirt, soft and spongy, almost as if it were swallowing my steps. The farther I went, the thicker the mist became, until I could barely make out the outline of the trees ahead. The air was thick with moisture, and every breath felt heavier than the last, like I was inhaling something far more sinister than just fog. Then, the noise came again. This time, it wasn't just a growl. It was louder, a series of scraping sounds, as though something, or someone, was dragging itself across the ground, clawing at the earth. The sound came from somewhere deeper within the forest, and it sent a shiver down my spine. My heart raced, and for a moment, I considered turning back, running as fast as I could. But I couldn't. I had to know what was here. The island was calling me, and no matter how much I fought it, I knew I couldn't escape without finding the truth. I continued walking, my steps deliberate but quick, my flashlight beam bouncing off the trees as I moved forward. Every crack of a branch, every distant rustle in the leaves made my pulse spike. The sound of dragging grew louder, more frantic, and now I could hear it clearly. It was coming from behind me. My breath caught in my throat, and I spun around, but saw nothing. Just the fog. Just the darkened trees. The growl, louder now, was in front of me again, almost as if it were taunting me. I stepped back, my body instinctively pulling away, but my feet were stuck to the ground, as if the earth had a hold on me. My throat felt dry, and I struggled to swallow as the hairs on the back of my neck rose once more. Whatever was making that noise, whatever was hiding just beyond my line of sight, it was real. I forced my legs to move, and despite the fear gnawing at me, I pushed forward, deeper into the forest. The trees closed in around me, their twisted forms pressing against one another, creating a maze of shadows. The growling continued, but now it had changed. It wasn't a growl anymore, it was a voice. A low, guttural whisper that seemed to come from all directions at once, pulling at my sanity. I tried to steady myself, tried to make sense of what I was hearing. But the whispers grew louder, closer, and my mind was filled with a torrent of confusion and fear. The air seemed to thicken with each passing second. The forest was alive, and it was aware of me. Suddenly, the flashlight flickered, casting long, trembling shadows across the trees. My hand shot out to steady it, but before I could focus, I saw something move in the corner of my eye. A figure. A dark shape, almost human, but not quite. I froze. It was watching me. And I was not alone on this island. The figure in the corner of my eye vanished before I could fully focus on it. I blinked, my heart pounding in my chest, but the shape was gone, swallowed up by the fog. The whispers in the trees lingered, like a low hum pressing against my skull. I shook my head, trying to clear the dizziness creeping over me, and stepped forward again. There had to be an explanation. This wasn't supernatural, it couldn't be. Yet, every instinct told me otherwise. The island was shifting under my feet, alive in ways that felt wrong. I needed answers. I pushed through the dense undergrowth, stumbling on roots and rocks hidden beneath the mist. The fog was so thick now that the light from my flashlight barely made a difference, casting feeble shadows that seemed to stretch endlessly. The air was dense, heavy with moisture and something more, something foul. A staleness, like the island itself hadn't seen daylight in ages. I came across a new structure, a half-collapsed building barely standing against the relentless forces of time. The walls, cracked and sagging, were coated in layers of moss and mildew, and the roof had caved in on one side. It looked like it had once been a small house, or perhaps a shack for storage. It was hard to tell in its ruined state, but it felt significant, like it was the key to something. With a mixture of dread and resolve, I approached the building. The air grew colder as I neared, the whispers from the trees still echoing in the distance. I hesitated before stepping through the doorway, the beams overhead creaking ominously. Inside, the space was dark, with only faint light filtering through gaps in the broken walls. And then I saw it. Nestled in the corner, half hidden under a pile of rotting debris, was a small wooden chest. It looked old, withered, and covered in dust, but the latch was still intact. My curiosity pulled me forward despite the rising panic in my chest. I crouched beside the chest, hesitated for a moment, and then opened it. Inside, there was a leather-bound diary, its pages yellowed and frayed at the edges. The weight of it in my hands felt wrong, as if it had been waiting for me, for someone, to discover it. A strange, almost magnetic pull urged me to open it, to read what was written within. I could already feel the weight of the island pressing down on me, as though I was trespassing on something ancient. I flipped open the first page, and the handwriting inside was messy, erratic, the ink smeared as though the writer had been hurried or distressed. The fog never lifts. It swallows everything. I've seen the land, strange, twisted, as if it's alive. It changes in a mist. They warned me. They all warned me. But I didn't listen. Now I'm trapped. I felt a cold shiver crawl up my spine, my breath hitching in my throat. It didn't make sense. What did they mean by trapped? I turned the page, desperate for more. Day 3. The island, it's not just a place. It's something more. It has a mind of its own. I can feel it watching me, even while I'm asleep. They're all gone now, the others. Disappeared without a trace. I thought I was imagining things, but I'm not. The whispers, God, the whispers won't stop. I tried to leave, but the fog, it's everywhere. I can't get out. It's closing in on me. A lump formed in my throat as I read the desperate words. My mind raced, trying to piece together the strange events of the past few hours. The fog, the whispers, the shadows that flitted just beyond the light, it all lined up too perfectly. This diary, this person, they had experienced it too. But what had happened to them? What had happened to everyone else who had been here? I flipped to the next entry, the handwriting becoming even more chaotic. Day 7. I can feel it coming. It's not just the island anymore. It's something else. Something in the trees, something in the fog. It's getting closer. I can hear it every night, the growls, the scraping, and now I see them. The shadows, the things from the mist. They walk on 2 legs, but their eyes are empty. They're watching. Waiting. I can't leave. It's too late. I felt sick, my stomach turning as I read the last words. My pulse quickened. The diary seemed to describe everything I had been experiencing. The strange noises, the whispers, the growing feeling of being haunted. And this person, whoever they were, had been trapped here, just like me. I read the final entry, barely able to make sense of the frantic scrawl. I hear the sound of footsteps behind me. I know it's over now. I am not alone here. No one will ever know. The island will take them, one by one. There is no escape. There is no escape. The final sentence was barely legible, being smeared as though the writer had been shaking uncontrollably. I closed the diary with trembling hands, my heart pounding in my chest. The words echoed in my mind like a curse. I couldn't believe what I had just read. This island, it wasn't just a place of isolation. It was a trap. A prison for those who came too close, too curious. I felt it again, the presence. The feeling that I wasn't alone. I wasn't imagining it. The island was alive. And it was watching me too. The whispers seemed to intensify, swirling around me, almost audible now. I had to get out. But how? The fog, the trees, the shadows, it was all closing in. There was no way to know if I'd ever make it back. I stuffed the diary into my bag, my hands shaking as I stood up. I had to leave the building, had to get away from whatever presence was lurking in the fog. But as I turned to leave, a figure stepped out from the darkness behind me, blocking the doorway. It was one of them. And I was trapped. The figure in the doorway was barely a silhouette, its form indistinct, like a shadow that didn't quite belong. My heart raced as I stood frozen, staring at it. I had seen something like this before, the shape, the presence in the mist, it was one of them. But this time, I could see its outline clearer, darker, more solid. My breath hitched in my throat, and my body tensed, ready to run, to do anything to escape. I stepped back, my hand reaching instinctively for the flashlight, but it slipped from my grasp, the beam of light flashing across the ground before it died in the darkness. The fog thickened, curling around my legs, swallowing the light completely. The island was alive, its presence pressing in on me from all sides. My mind spun, trying to make sense of what was happening. The figure didn't move, but I could feel its eyes, its presence, bearing down on me. It was waiting, watching. The whispers from the trees grew louder, converging into a low hum, like the island itself was speaking. Or perhaps it was something far worse. I turned quickly, stumbling backward, my heart racing. I had to leave. I had to get back to the boat before whatever this thing was could reach me. But as I moved, the ground beneath me seemed to shift. The trees, which had once been spaced apart, now crowded close together, blocking my path. I tried to push through, but the dense fog tangled around my legs like thick ropes, pulling at me, dragging me down. I stumbled, disoriented. The air was colder now, biting at my skin. The mist wasn't just swirling, it was moving, alive in its own way, twisting and undulating around me like something sentient. My eyes darted around, trying to find my bearings, but everything seemed to blur and change. The island was shifting. It wasn't just the fog that was thickening, it was the land itself. I had passed the same tree twice in a matter of seconds, the path ahead of me folding into itself like a living maze. The forest, once quiet, now creaked with unnatural sounds, the branches stretching out, twisting at impossible angles. The ground buckled beneath my feet, changing form, growing uneven, as if the island itself were rearranging itself around me. I turned in a circle, panic rising in my chest as I tried to orient myself. The structure where I had found the diary, the building, was gone. The space where it had stood was now nothing but an empty stretch of fog and shifting earth. It had been swallowed by the island, consumed, as though it had never existed at all. I stepped back, my mind racing. This isn't real, I whispered to myself, trying to ground myself in logic. This can't be happening. But every step I took seemed to make the landscape twist further, the trees warping and folding on themselves, the path disappearing behind me, the fog closing in tighter, blocking out any trace of light. My legs were shaking as I moved faster, desperate to find an exit, but the island refused to let me go. The fog was so thick now I couldn't see beyond the reach of my outstretched hand. I could hear nothing but the sound of my own breathing, ragged and uneven, echoing in the silence. And then, the ground beneath me shifted again, causing me to stumble forward. When I caught myself and looked up, I saw something that froze my blood. Ahead, in the murky distance, there was a clearing. A brief moment of clarity in the fog. But what stood in the center of it was not a structure or any sign of hope. It was a massive, twisted tree. Its trunk was thick, gnarled, and blackened as though it had been charred by fire. Its branches reached out like skeletal fingers, curling and twisting, casting dark shadows that stretched impossibly long. The tree seemed to pulse with a life of its own, as though it was breathing. And beneath it, I saw something moving. A figure. A figure, crouched low to the ground, its shape distorted, unnatural, shifting with every passing moment. It was impossible to make out clearly, but I could feel it watching me. Its eyes, if they were even eyes, burned with an intense, predatory gaze. It wasn't just standing there, it was waiting for me to come closer. My instincts screamed at me to run, but my feet felt glued to the earth, as though the island itself was holding me in place. The whispers, no, the voices, had grown louder now, almost deafening. They filled my head, drowning out all rational thought, growing more insistent, more frantic. I could hear them clearly now, their words blending together into a single sentence that repeated over and over again. You will never leave. I spun around, desperate to find a way out, but the path that had once been behind me was gone. In its place stood nothing but trees and fog, stretching endlessly into the void. The island had consumed everything, changed everything. I was trapped. There was no way out. The land had shifted completely. There was no longer any sense of direction, no point of reference. I was at the mercy of the island, its shifting landscape, its growing presence. I could feel the fog closing around me, suffocating, almost alive. The whispers, the growls, the scraping sounds, they were all coming closer, surrounding me. And the tree. The figure under the tree. It was waiting for me. I turned and ran, stumbling through the fog, my mind frantically trying to find a way out, but I knew deep down it was hopeless. The island had taken its hold on me. There was no escape. And then, as I ran, I realized something. I had been here before. I ran. My feet pounded the uneven ground, but no matter how fast I moved, the fog seemed to close in faster. The eerie stillness of the island surrounded me, yet it felt like something was lurking just out of sight. The heavy air made each breath harder to take, my lungs filling with a strange, metallic taste. My pulse hammered in my ears, matching the rhythm of my frantic steps, but even as I ran, I couldn't shake the overwhelming sense of being pulled deeper into something far worse than I could have imagined. Then, I heard it. A low, distant ticking sound. I stopped abruptly, my heart skipping a beat. It sounded like a clock, but I couldn't see any source. I looked around, confused. The fog thickened, swallowing the light, and the ticking grew louder, more insistent, almost deafening. It was coming from somewhere close, yet there was no clock in sight. My mind raced. Had I missed something? Was I hallucinating? I looked down at my wrist. My watch had been functioning fine when I first arrived, but now it seemed stuck. The second hand refused to move. I pressed my thumb against the glass, trying to make it work, but it was as though the watch was frozen in place, its time locked, suspended in some unreachable moment. I yanked it off my wrist in frustration and threw it to the ground. It clattered against the rocky earth, but didn't shatter. The ticking continued, relentless, as though the island itself was mocking me. There was something unnatural happening, something wrong, and it was as if time itself was being manipulated. I turned my gaze up to the sky, half expecting to see the sun, but the thick fog obscured everything, leaving only a sense of timelessness. My mind was racing. I'd been on this island for hours, maybe longer, but the concept of time felt distorted. The shifting fog, the strange sounds, the shadows I saw creeping in and out of existence, it was as if the rules of reality didn't apply here. I looked around, trying to get my bearings, but the landscape felt off. The trees I passed earlier seemed different, taller, their branches now twisted in unnatural ways, as if they had grown since the last time I had looked. The clearing where I had seen the tree with the figure was gone. In its place was more forest, endless and unyielding. And then I saw it. A building, barely visible through the mist. I knew I hadn't passed it before. It was a small, dilapidated cabin, the windows dark and shattered, its door ajar, creaking softly as if inviting me in. A cold dread filled me as I approached, my feet moving without thought. The ticking, which had somehow grown even louder, seemed to pulse in my head, reverberating through my body. I could feel it vibrating in my bones, as if the island's heartbeat was syncing with my own. Inside the cabin, I found what I feared, clocks. Dozens of them, old and weathered, their faces cracked, their hands frozen in place. It was as though time had been caught here, unable to move forward or backward. The room was filled with the eerie sound of ticking, like 1,000 clocks all stuck in a loop, endlessly repeating. I walked deeper into the cabin, the floorboards creaking under my weight. A cold draft swept through, and I instinctively pulled my jacket tighter around me, trying to shield myself from the chill. The clocks all seemed to be in different states of decay, some broken, some almost new, yet all trapped at different times, some stopped at moments in the past, others at moments I couldn't place. None of them moved. None of them showed the time as it should be. As I moved through the cabin, my eyes landed on something at the far end of the room, a large mirror covered with dust and cobwebs. My breath hitched. I hadn't noticed it at first, but now it seemed like the only thing in the room that had any life. The reflection in the mirror was distorted, flickering, like a bad signal on an old television. The image didn't match what was in front of me. Instead of the cabin, I saw the fog, the trees, the shifting ground, everything I had been running from. The mirror was showing an alternate version of the island, a place that felt wrong, like a twisted reflection of reality. I stepped closer, drawn to the mirror, and as I did, I felt something change. The fog outside seemed to stir, moving around the mirror as if it had a mind of its own. The ticking grew louder, the echoes of the clocks merging with the sound of my heartbeat. Suddenly, the reflection in the mirror shifted again. I saw myself, standing just as I was now, but I looked different. My face was pale, my eyes hollow, like a shadow of who I once was. I reached out, instinctively, my hand trembling, but as I touched the glass, everything seemed to distort. The world around me rippled, like water disturbed by a stone. I stumbled back, horrified. The ticking stopped. The silence that followed was suffocating. And then I realized the island was not just trapping me physically. It was trapping me in time. The clocks, the shifting landscape, the distorted reflections, they were all part of it. The island was playing with time, bending it, trapping anyone who stepped foot on it in a never-ending cycle. There was no escaping it. The island didn't just take you, it twisted you, trapping you in its web, forcing you to live through the same horrors over and over again. I wasn't just lost on this island. I was lost in time itself. The ticking started again, but now it felt different. More urgent. The air shifted, as if the island was beginning to close in, to seal off the moments I had left. The fog swirled violently, pressing against the cabin walls. I turned and ran. I couldn't breathe. My legs moved, but the island had a way of pulling me back, its grip tightening with every step. I bolted from the cabin, stumbling over the uneven ground, my heart a wild drumbeat in my chest. The fog swirled violently around me, thickening with each passing second, as though the island itself were deliberately guiding me towards something, or perhaps keeping me from leaving. I glanced back once, but the cabin was already consumed by the mist. It was as though it had never existed, swallowed by the ever-encroaching fog that clouded everything around me. The trees loomed over me, their twisted branches scraping against the sky, stretching toward the place where the sun should have been. But there was no sun, no light. Just this endless, oppressive grayness. I had to leave. I had to find my way back to the boat, to escape this nightmare before it consumed me completely. The clock, the mirror, the feeling of being watched, it was all too much. My mind raced with the thought of the boat, waiting on the shore, my one lifeline to the outside world. I couldn't let the island keep me any longer. I pushed forward, the sound of my own ragged breath mixing with the hum of the fog. The ticking, that persistent, maddening sound, had stopped, but the silence that followed was even worse. The island was waiting. It always was. I came to a fork in the path. The trees ahead seemed to shift, as though rearranging themselves, making it impossible to tell which way I had come from. My eyes darted to the left and then to the right. Both paths led deeper into the island's heart, where I knew there could be no escape. But the fog wasn't just a barrier, it was a force. A force that distorted everything around me. I took a deep breath, steeling myself. The path to the left looked more familiar, so I took it, praying I would find the shore again. But no matter which direction I turned, the island had a way of making everything feel wrong. I had walked for what felt like hours, yet it seemed like no time had passed at all. The landscape around me had changed, morphed, and twisted into something unrecognizable. The trees were now growing in unnatural patterns, their roots splitting the earth beneath me. The ground trembled with each step, as if the island was alive, breathing beneath my feet. I heard the soft rustling again, the sound of something following me through the mist. It was subtle at first, like the wind or the movement of branches. But it grew louder, closer. I quickened my pace, my legs burning with exertion, but the fog only thickened, cutting off my vision. My head spun. My mouth felt dry. I pushed through the fog, but the path seemed endless. Each time I turned a corner or passed a bend, the landscape had changed, as if the island were deliberately leading me deeper, taking me farther from the shore. The whispers began again, this time louder, clearer, more frantic. They came from all directions, like voices speaking just beyond my hearing, murmuring things I couldn't quite understand. I tried to focus, tried to ignore them, but they crawled under my skin, scratching at my nerves, pulling at my thoughts. "You will never leave." The words rang in my head, an echo I couldn't escape. I shook my head, trying to clear it, but the words persisted, repeating over and over, filling my mind with dread. I looked around, desperate. There had to be a way out. I couldn't let this island win. I couldn't let it take me, like it had taken so many others before. Then, I saw it. In the distance, barely visible through the swirling fog, was something that stood apart from the rest, the shoreline. The outline of the boat. A flood of relief washed over me. I had found it. My boat, my only hope for escape. I stumbled toward it, each step quickening with urgency. My body was exhausted, my muscles burning, but the thought of leaving this place pushed me forward. The mist clung to me, its cold tendrils wrapping around my ankles, as though the island was pulling me back, trying to hold me here. The boat looked far away now, farther than I remembered, like it had been moved. My stomach twisted with panic. How had it gotten so far from the shore? I had been walking in the same direction the entire time. I reached the shore at last, my feet sinking into the wet sand, but something was wrong. The boat, it wasn't where it should have been. The shore I had come to was unfamiliar. The landscape was all wrong. There were no familiar landmarks. The sea was gone, replaced by dense trees and a deep, dark forest. I turned around, my breath shallow, my mind racing. The island had changed again. The shoreline had never been where I had seen it last. It was as if the land had shifted, pulling me further into its heart. The boat I had seen, the one that had been my salvation, was now lost to me. I couldn't escape. The fog grew heavier, denser, closing in around me, smothering me in its embrace. The whispers returned, more insistent, more chaotic. My pulse quickened. I stumbled backward, the fog pressing against my skin, each breath feeling like it would be my last. My legs faltered beneath me, but I forced myself to move, to find the way back to the shore that I knew had to be there. But the island had other plans. I turned once more, my gaze falling on the path ahead. And there, standing in front of me, was the same twisted tree I had seen before. The one with the figure beneath it. The island had drawn me back. I was no longer running forward. I was running in circles, trapped in a cycle of endless time and shifting paths. The island had become a maze, and I was caught at its center, forever lost. I could feel it now. The island wasn't just a place, it was a prison. It was consuming me, bending my reality, pulling me into its endless loop. The fog had swallowed everything, turning the trees into ghostly figures, their twisted shapes looming like silent watchers. My head felt heavy, as if the air was thickening, suffocating me. But as I walked, driven by the desperation to escape, I saw something that made my blood run cold. A figure. At first, I thought it was a trick of the fog, but as I approached, the figure remained motionless just ahead of me on the path. A man, hunched over, standing in the middle of the fog. His clothes were ragged, his face shadowed by the mist. His eyes were distant, unfocused, staring into nothing, as though he couldn't remember the last time he had looked at anything with true awareness. "Hey!" I called out, my voice hoarse from the endless walking. "Are you okay? Can you help me?" The figure didn't respond. Instead, it turned slowly toward me, and as it did, I noticed something terrifying. The man's face was pale, his eyes wide and empty. There was a hollow look to him, like he had seen too much, lost too much. His lips moved, but the sound that came out wasn't a word, it was a broken, strangled whisper. I can't remember." His voice was hollow, as if he'd said the same thing over and over. His eyes flickered, briefly filled with some recognition, but then they glazed over again, lost in the fog. He stumbled forward a few steps, as though he were going somewhere, but then he stopped and turned, as if nothing had ever happened. He stood still, repeating the same motion, trapped in a cycle he couldn't escape. I froze. It hit me then, this man wasn't lost like I was. He was trapped. Just like I was. I took a step closer, my heart racing. "What do you mean? What can't you remember?" The man's eyes flickered toward me, and he spoke, his voice shaking, barely above a whisper. "I don't know how long I've been here. I don't remember. I've been here forever." The words hung in the air, and I felt a chill creep up my spine. "Forever?" I echoed. "What are you talking about? How long have you been here?" But he didn't respond. His gaze slipped back into the fog, his mind once again retreating into whatever cycle the island had cast him into. He took another few steps forward and then stopped again, his movements robotic, mindless. Like he was stuck, doomed to repeat his actions, unable to break free. I stood there for a moment, paralyzed, as the fog swirled around me, wrapping its cold fingers around my thoughts. Then, as if something compelled me to do it, I took a step back, looking around for any sign of escape. But that's when I saw them. More figures, emerging from the mist like shadows, like ghosts from a forgotten time. There were others, too, all in the same state. Some were walking aimlessly, some standing still, their faces hollow, eyes lost in the fog, as if they were living out the same moment over and over again, without ever knowing when it started or when it would end. One woman was crouched by a broken-down cart, her hands gently moving the wheel over and over in a circular motion, like she was pushing it forward but never getting anywhere. Her face was blank, expressionless, and her eyes, those eyes were glassy, staring out into nothingness. A man farther down the path was repeating the same actions, looking at his watch, shaking his head in confusion, then staring out into the fog. Every few seconds, he would check his watch again, only to find the time hadn't changed. It was as though he was locked in some invisible, repetitive moment. And they weren't just moving randomly. They were all moving in specific, calculated patterns. As if the island had choreographed their every step. The fog seemed to guide them, push them, and in turn, they pushed through it, again and again. None of them seemed to notice me. I stood still, watching, a sick feeling growing in my stomach. I was beginning to understand what was happening here. These people had been trapped for far longer than I could fathom. They didn't remember how long they'd been here. They didn't remember anything. One woman, her clothes tattered and faded, walked past me. Her face was gaunt, her eyes vacant. She had been walking in a circle for what looked like hours, maybe days, as though she had forgotten the meaning of time. Her feet moved forward without thought, her hands reaching out as if she were looking for something she couldn't remember. I reached out instinctively, my fingers brushing against her arm. Her skin was cold, lifeless. She didn't react. I pulled my hand back, feeling the weight of her emptiness settle over me. She was already lost, just like the others. Just like I was about to be. I staggered backward, panic rising in my chest. How long had they been here? How long had they been trapped in this cycle of endless, meaningless repetition? The fog pressed in around me, the figures closing in like a sea of shadows, trapped forever by the island's strange power. I wanted to scream, to shout at them, to ask if there was any hope of escape. But their vacant expressions told me everything I needed to know. They couldn't remember. They couldn't break free. I wasn't just a visitor here. I was part of the cycle now. Just like them. I turned, desperate to find another way out, but the fog had already consumed the path. There was no escape. The island was changing me, just like it had changed them. The fog swirled, closing around me, and I felt it. The island was drawing me into its endless loop. I had become part of its story, and there was no way to break free. The figures continued their endless, repeating motions. The island had claimed them, and now it was claiming me too. The fog seemed to thicken with every step I took, each breath harder to draw in. It wasn't just the mist anymore, it was something else. A suffocating weight in the air, an invisible force that pressed down on me, pushing me deeper into the island's twisted heart. I could feel it, that unrelenting grip tightening around my chest, slowly suffocating me. I stumbled back down the path, my heart pounding in my ears. I had to get out. I had to find a way to escape this place, to leave behind the figures that shuffled through the fog like lost spirits, locked in their endless routines. I was beginning to understand the true horror of it. This wasn't just a nightmare I could wake from. This was real. This island had no intention of letting me leave. As I walked, I glanced at the faces of those trapped here with me. They didn't even look like people anymore. They were shadows, remnants of lives that had been stolen, hollowed out by time. And the worst part? I wasn't sure if they even realized they were lost. They moved through their endless cycles, repeating the same gestures, the same steps, over and over, like marionettes without strings, pulled by some unseen hand. My steps grew more frantic. I searched desperately for any sign of escape, anything that might lead me out of this suffocating fog. The trees, twisted and gnarled, seemed to close in around me, their branches reaching out like long fingers, brushing against my arms. Each time I looked over my shoulder, I half expected to see someone, or something, following me, but when I turned, the path was empty. Only the fog, the endless, choking fog, followed. I moved faster, but every path seemed to loop back on itself. No matter which direction I took, I found myself in the same place, back at the ruined building with the weathered diary, or near the twisted tree I had seen earlier. It was as though the island was mocking me, trapping me in its cycle of unending repetition. Why can't I leave? I whispered to myself, barely able to speak through the panic that was slowly rising in my chest. Why can't I get out? There was no answer, just the sound of my own breath, ragged and shallow in the thickening air. My mind raced. I had seen the others. I had seen how they were trapped, locked in their loops, unable to remember anything before their arrival, unable to escape the island's strange grip. Were they like me? Had they come here, hoping to escape, only to fall into the same trap? My eyes darted around, trying to find something, anything, that might give me an explanation. But the island was an enigma, its secrets hidden beneath layers of fog and shadow. There was no logic here, no reason for the things I had seen, no rhyme or reason to the paths that twisted endlessly on themselves. Suddenly, the ground beneath me shifted, the earth trembling as though something beneath it was stirring. I froze, my pulse quickening. I could feel it, the tremor in the air, the subtle shift in the world around me. The island wasn't just a place, it was alive. Alive in ways I couldn't understand. A low rumble echoed from deep within the earth, and I stumbled backward. I was starting to feel it now. This was no ordinary island. It was a living, breathing thing, and it had claimed me. I turned again, searching for an exit, but the fog was everywhere. It seemed to be the island. The mist wrapped itself around every tree, every rock, every path. There was no way through. No way around it. The island had closed in, and I was trapped. The realization hit me like a cold wave. The island wasn't just playing with me, it was making me part of its story. I wasn't a visitor. I wasn't someone who had wandered in by accident. The island had claimed me from the start. It had been waiting for me. I tried to push through the fog, my body heavy with exhaustion. My legs were numb, my mind unraveling with every step. My head spun as the whispers returned, voices I couldn't quite understand, but I felt their meaning deep in my bones. The island wanted me. It was hungry for me. I collapsed against a tree, gasping for air, my breath coming in quick, panic bursts. There had to be a way out. There had to be something. I wasn't like the others. I hadn't been here as long as they had. I wasn't like them yet. But then, I looked around and saw something that made my blood run cold. The faces. The hollow faces of the other lost souls, they were all staring at me. All of them. Their eyes were locked on mine, but they didn't see me. Their gaze was distant, like they were staring through me. Or maybe I was staring through them. One of the figures, an old man, slowly took a step toward me. His movements were stiff, jerky. His lips moved as though he were trying to speak, but all that came out was a whisper. "It's too late." I recoiled, my heart pounding in my chest. Too late? I had only just arrived. I couldn't have been trapped already. Could I? I glanced around again. The fog was thicker now, almost suffocating. The figures had started moving again, repeating the same actions, the same gestures. It was as if they had never stopped. They were stuck in their loops, and so was I. This wasn't a place I could leave. This was my fate. I took another step back, but the fog pressed harder against me. The whispers were louder now, insistent. They filled my head, a cacophony of voices all speaking at once. I could feel the island's grip tightening, pulling me in. And just as I started to turn, to scream out in desperation, a horrible realization settled over me. The figures weren't lost souls. They were me. I was trapped. Trapped in this endless loop of time, lost among the mist, with no way out. and I would never escape. I could no longer distinguish where reality ended and the island's supernatural grip began. The fog wasn't just a barrier, it was a living entity, twisting around me, suffocating me with its presence. Every breath felt heavier, as if the air itself was infected by the island's madness. My surroundings seemed to shift, subtly at first, like the ground beneath my feet wasn't quite as solid as it should be. The trees, the ruined buildings, even the sky, everything felt wrong, like a distorted reflection in a cracked mirror. The shadows, though, were the most unnerving part. At first, I dismissed them as tricks of the light, or my own mind playing cruel games on me. But then I saw it again, a shadow, fleeting and unnatural, darting just beyond the edge of my vision. I spun around, my heart hammering in my chest, but there was nothing. Just the fog, swirling like an ominous fog, wrapping tighter around me, filling every crevice with its cold embrace. I tried to shake it off, to convince myself it was nothing, just the isolation, the stress, the panic making me see things. But then the whispers started. They came at first as a low murmur, indistinct and fleeting. I thought I was hearing things, but as I took another step, they grew clearer. Soft voices, barely above a whisper, murmuring my name. They seemed to echo all around me, fading in and out of the fog, just beyond my reach. I stopped, my breath catching in my throat, straining to make out the words, but they were always just out of reach, always slipping away before I could fully hear them. The ground beneath me trembled again, this time more violently. I staggered back, trying to keep my balance as the island itself seemed to move, shifting and warping. The trees creaked and groaned as though they were alive, their branches reaching out like clawed hands. The air grew thicker, heavier, until it felt like I was drowning in it. Then, I saw them. The shadows weren't just playing tricks. They were figures. Tall, dark silhouettes, moving in the periphery of my vision. They weren't human, not really. Their shapes were wrong, elongated limbs, faces obscured by the fog, and yet they moved with purpose. I tried to run, to move faster, but the shadows seemed to follow me. Every time I glanced over my shoulder, they were closer, inching toward me with impossible speed. A voice, my voice, suddenly echoed through the fog. "Don't run," it whispered, but it wasn't me saying it. The voice was distorted, hollow, filled with a kind of cold malice that sent a shiver down my spine. I froze. I was not alone. The fog parted momentarily, just enough for me to catch a glimpse of one of the figures. It wasn't a person. It wasn't anything that could exist in the real world. It was a thing, an entity, a dark mass of shifting shapes that seemed to devour the light around it. Its eyes, if they could be called that, glowed faintly, like pale stars in the vast, empty dark, and it was staring directly at me. I could feel it watching me, studying me. A sudden, violent distortion in time ripped through the air. The world around me seemed to collapse in on itself, twisting and folding like a piece of paper. My surroundings flickered between moments, first the fog, then an old, rotting house, then the thick, tangled trees, all shifting, bending in unnatural ways. I felt dizzy, disoriented, as if I had slipped between two different times, or was caught in some kind of ripple in reality. The ground beneath my feet seemed to fall away, and I almost stumbled into a void. The whispers grew louder, more frantic. I could hear them clearly now, the distorted voices pressing in from every direction. "It's too late for you," one of the voices said. "You will never leave." The shadows moved faster now, as though the island itself was closing in around me, trapping me in this shifting, fragmented nightmare. I could barely see, barely think, as time itself seemed to fold in on itself. One moment I was running, the next I was back at the same spot, the same trees, the same twisted path, and the figures were closer, always closer. I screamed. A sharp, desperate sound that broke through the chaos, but even as my voice echoed in the fog, I knew it was futile. The island didn't care. It was rewriting everything. I ran again, stumbling through the fog, trying to escape the nightmare that was tightening its grip on me. But the more I ran, the more I realized there was nowhere to go. The shadows were not just following me, they were pulling me in. I was part of their world now, caught in a cycle of terror, and there was no way to break free. The island had already consumed me, and I was just beginning to understand what that really meant. I was no longer sure if I was awake. The island had blurred the line between reality and nightmare, and it seemed to toy with me, stretching the boundaries of both. The fog hung like a shroud, a thick, oppressive blanket that muffled every sound, every movement. I couldn't remember the last time I'd felt the warmth of the sun or seen a clear sky. It had been hours, maybe days, since I had first set foot on the island, but it felt like I'd been here for an eternity. The strangest part, though, was the shadows. At first, they had been small, flickers at the corner of my eye, just beyond the reach of my understanding. A shape that moved too quickly, a form that wasn't quite right, darting in the fog like a specter. But now they were impossible to ignore. As I walked deeper into the island, I noticed them following me. At first, I thought it was just my mind playing tricks on me, the exhaustion catching up, but the feeling was undeniable. I was being watched. And it wasn't just the usual eerie sensation of being alone in an unfamiliar place, it was something else, something much darker. The shadows began to stretch and twist unnaturally, elongating as if they had a life of their own. When I stopped moving, they seemed to stop with me, lingering just out of my direct line of sight. The instant I turned to look, they would retreat, slinking away into the fog, only to return when I wasn't paying attention. It was as if they were studying me, observing me, waiting for me to make a mistake. I quickened my pace, trying to shake the feeling, but the shadows seemed to follow, adapting to my every movement. The air around me grew colder, the fog thicker, and I could hear something, soft footsteps echoing in the distance. Were they just my own? Or was something else walking just out of view? I tried to dismiss it, tried to convince myself that the shadows were simply tricks of the mind, products of fear and isolation. But then, as I rounded a corner, I saw something that made my blood run cold. In the space between the trees, a figure stood watching me. Tall, slender, and impossibly still, it blended perfectly with the fog, as though it was part of the island itself. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light, the way the fog twisted around the trees, but as I blinked, the figure remained. I froze, staring at it, trying to convince myself it wasn't real. But it was real. I could feel it. The figure didn't move at first, but its presence was suffocating. It seemed to draw the fog closer, thickening the air until I could barely breathe. I could see no features, no face, only the vague outline of a person dressed in ragged, tattered clothing. It was as if the fog itself had created it, or worse, that it was born from the fog. I took a tentative step forward, and in that instant, the figure vanished. One moment, it was there, just standing, watching me, and the next, it was gone, swallowed by the mist as if it had never been. I stood motionless, my heart racing, unsure of whether I should feel relief or terror. And then, I heard it. A soft rustling sound behind me. I spun around, expecting to find nothing, but the fog was heavier now, swirling around my feet, creeping up my legs, wrapping itself around me like cold fingers. I could barely see more than a few feet in front of me. And there it was again, the figure. This time, it was closer. I felt my breath catch in my throat. How had it gotten so close without me hearing anything? How had it moved without a sound? My mind raced, trying to make sense of it, but there was no explanation. There was no reason for any of this to be happening. I began walking quickly again, almost breaking into a run, but as soon as I moved, the shadows followed, flickering just beyond my sight. Each time I turned my head, I would see them move closer and closer, as if they were gaining on me. The figures seemed to multiply, emerging from the fog, standing just at the edges of my vision, their forms flickering like shadows in a nightmare. I stumbled and fell to my knees, the ground trembling beneath me. The island was not just trapping me, it was toying with me, pushing me deeper into madness. The fog thickened until it was nearly impossible to breathe, and I could hear the distant, whispering voices again, but now they weren't just distant, they were inside my head. Don't run. Stay with us. You can't escape. I looked up, and in the haze, I saw the figures again, moving closer. Their shapes twisted and shifted, their limbs bending in unnatural ways. It was like they were too tall, too thin, too much like something that should not exist. Their eyes, those glowing eyes, were the only thing I could make out, bright against the endless darkness of the fog. My heartbeat raced as panic set in. I was not alone. The island was not just alive, it was feeding on my fear, drawing me into its web, and I could feel it. I was already a part of it. I could feel the shift in the air, the oppressive weight of the place pressing down harder with every step I took. The shadows, once distant and subtle, were now all around me, closing in from every angle. I had no way out. No escape. And as I turned to face what was inevitably coming, I realized that the island wasn't just playing tricks on me. It was alive. And it was using the shadows to consume me. To break me. The fog swallowed me whole. I stood frozen, breathing heavily, my heart pounding in my chest. The figures, the shadows, had they really been there? Or had it all been a trick of my mind? I closed my eyes, trying to calm myself. I was exhausted. I hadn't slept properly in what felt like days. The fog, the eerie quiet, the isolation, it was all messing with my head. It's just the stress, I told myself. It's just your mind playing tricks on you. You're imagining things. You're not in any real danger. I took a few deep breaths, forcing my body to steady itself, fighting against the overwhelming urge to run, to escape this madness. I needed to think clearly. I had to focus. There had to be a rational explanation for what was happening. There had to be. I looked around, trying to steady my thoughts. The island seemed unchanged, silent, dark, and fog-choked. The air was thick, and the trees towered over me like silent sentinels. The ground beneath my feet felt firm. The only thing out of place was the feeling in my chest, the tightness that made it hard to breathe, the constant sense that something was wrong. But that, I reasoned, was just anxiety. You're tired, I thought. That's all it is. Tiredness and fear. You're seeing things because your mind is overloaded. It's not real. It can't be. I forced myself to move forward. The island wasn't going to beat me. I wasn't going to let my fear control me. I had faced danger before. I had survived worse. This was nothing. I was just in an unfamiliar place, my mind unraveling because of the stress. But then, just as I took another step, I heard it. A soft crunch, like something shifting in the fog behind me. I spun around, panic rising in my throat, but once again, there was nothing. The fog swirled lazily around the trees, the ground remained still, and the air hung thick with an unnatural stillness. It's nothing. Just the wind. Just a twig cracking underfoot. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to calm down again. You're okay. This isn't real. I kept walking, telling myself that the island was nothing more than a patch of land lost in time, a place where fear and isolation preyed on your mind. This couldn't be anything more than the product of my own mind unraveling. Then, I heard it again. A whisper. It was faint at first, like a breath caught in the wind. No, I thought, shaking my head. No. This is all just in your head. You're overreacting. The whisper grew louder, more distinct, and I froze. It sounded almost like my name. Come closer. I spun around, looking frantically for the source. The fog pressed in tighter, and the shadows seemed to elongate, stretching further across the ground, reaching toward me. I was alone, wasn't I? There was no one else here. Yet, the whispering continued, circling in the fog, like a distant, forgotten memory, impossible to ignore. You're not alone, the voice repeated. I clenched my fists, anger mingling with fear. It's nothing. It's just the stress. It's just your mind. But that voice, soft, unsettling, was different. I could feel it. It was real. It wasn't a product of my imagination. There was something on this island, something trying to communicate with me, trying to pull me into its grasp. It was playing with me, feeding off my fear, my confusion. I began walking faster, trying to outrun the creeping terror that gripped me. The fog pressed in tighter, and the trees loomed over me like silent watchers. But the whispers, though faint, followed me, always just on the edge of my hearing. I tried to reason with myself again. It's just your mind playing tricks. You're tired, stressed, maybe even dehydrated. The fog is messing with your perception. But even as I thought it, something inside me screamed that this was more than that. It felt like the island itself was alive, aware of me. And the more I tried to convince myself otherwise, the more I felt the pull, the weight of something unseen, following me, waiting for me to slip. The shadows flickered at the edges of my vision again, just beyond the fog. They were close now, too close, their shapes indistinct but growing in number. They weren't just in my head, they were there. I turned around to face the trees, my breath quickening. Just focus. Just move. Get to the boat and get out of here. This is just a phase. This will end. But every step I took, the shadows seemed to move with me. I couldn't outrun them, no matter how fast I walked. A flicker of movement in the fog caught my eye, and I stopped dead in my tracks. There, barely visible in the shifting mist, a tall, thin figure, hunched and twisted, standing still. It didn't move at first, but its presence was suffocating, like a weight pressing down on my chest. It was as if it had been waiting for me, anticipating my every move. I was sure it was there to follow me, to consume me, just like the other shadowy figures I'd seen before. My mind screamed at me to run, to flee, but my body felt heavy, trapped in place by an unseen force. The figure remained still, watching, but there was something in its posture, a sense of malice, that made it feel alive. It wasn't just a shadow. It wasn't a trick of the light. The voice whispered again, closer now. You can't escape. My hands trembled. I tried to speak, to shout, but my throat was dry, my words strangled by fear. I couldn't get them out. Focus. This is just stress. It's not real. You're hallucinating. But even as I tried to convince myself, I knew deep down that the island was no longer just playing tricks on me. It was trying to pull me into it, into its endless cycle of torment. And the more I tried to deny it, the more I realized I was already too far gone. I couldn't outrun the feeling anymore. It had been growing in my chest, like a vice slowly tightening, and now, standing in the heart of the island, I could no longer deny it. I was being hunted. The air was suffocating, thick with the fog and something else, something oppressive that made every breath feel like a struggle. The whispers were louder now, an incoherent chorus that seemed to come from all directions. Every step I took, the shadows followed, bending, twisting, stretching like elongated limbs creeping through the mist. Then I saw it again. The tall, distorted figure from before, standing just a few feet away from me. It wasn't in my peripheral vision this time. No, this one was right there, as real as anything I'd seen, and yet, not. It was too tall, too thin, its body contorted in ways that shouldn't have been possible. Its arms hung unnaturally low, nearly grazing the ground, and its face was a blur of shadow, indistinct but terrifying. A mask of darkness, shifting, as if it were too dark to be natural. I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. My feet felt like they were glued to the ground. The fog clung to me, wrapping around my ankles like cold hands, and my heart thudded in my chest as I stared at the creature before me. Its eyes, they weren't eyes at all, but two hollow pits of pure darkness, a blackness that seemed to swallow any light that dared to touch them. And then it made a sound. At first, I thought it was a whisper, like the others, soft, unintelligible, a voice lost to time. But as the figure stepped closer, I realized it was something else. It was speaking. Not in any language I knew, not in any way I could comprehend. Its mouth, if you could even call it that, opened and closed, but the sound that escaped it was like the creaking of ancient wood, the grinding of stone against stone. It was a guttural, low noise, like the island itself was trying to communicate through it, but I couldn't make sense of it. It wasn't a voice I could understand. It wasn't even human. It was almost musical in a twisted, terrifying way. A melody that echoed through my skull, filling me with a sense of deep, paralyzing dread. The rhythm of the noise didn't make sense. It didn't follow any pattern I knew. It wasn't a conversation. It was an invitation. A part of me knew it was speaking to me, trying to reach through the fog of fear and confusion. But another part, the part that wanted to run, to escape, screamed that I had to get away. Please, I whispered, my voice hoarse from the weight of fear that crushed me. Please, don't. The figure's form seemed to ripple in the fog, as if it wasn't entirely real, as if it was being made and unmade with each breath I took. It took another step forward, its feet dragging across the ground with a scraping sound that sent chills down my spine. The air grew colder, sharper, as if the very temperature of the world was being sucked into its form. My skin prickled, and the hairs on the back of my neck stood on end. The thing, whatever it was close now, so close I could feel the pressure of its presence, its weight in the air. It reached out, and its hand, twisted and elongated, hovered just inches from my face. The shadows in the fog around us seemed to pull tighter, twisting into shapes of their own, like they were waiting for something, like they were a part of the creature's will. Its hand didn't move, but I could feel it closing in on me, its presence suffocating, unyielding. For a split second, my mind fought against the overwhelming terror, trying to make sense of the impossible. Was it real? Was this some hallucination brought on by the isolation, the fog, the endless pressure of being trapped here? Or was this truly something from beyond, something that had been waiting for me, for us? I couldn't make sense of it, but that didn't matter. My survival instincts kicked in, the fight or flight response rushing through my veins. I had to move. I had to escape. With a cry, I broke free, stumbling backward, my legs shaking beneath me. The figure didn't follow. Instead, it just stood there, unmoving, its hollow eyes staring through me, watching me as I backed away, helpless and terrified. And then, as I turned to run, I heard it. The sound again. That whisper, that melody, like the island was calling me, singing my name in that distorted, unintelligible language. I heard my name, the real one, echo through the fog, pulled from the depths of my mind. Come closer. The air seemed to thicken, the pressure mounting in my chest as I took one step forward, compelled by the voice that came from everywhere and nowhere. My feet dragged, heavy and reluctant, but I couldn't stop myself. The voice was in my head now, calling me closer, urging me forward. I didn't want to go, but my body was moving on its own. It was as if the island itself had taken control. I was no longer thinking for myself. I was drawn into its pull, into the abyss that waited just beyond the mist, where shadows whispered and twisted, where time was an illusion, and where nothing was as it seemed. The shadow before me remained still, watching me with those eyes that could not see. I could feel its gaze on me, knowing I had no choice now but to step into the waiting darkness. And with every step I took, the fog grew thicker, the shadows longer. The island's grip tightened, and I was left with only one thought: I had already lost. I couldn't stop moving. My feet, as if by their own will, carried me further into the depths of the island. The whispers had faded, but that oppressive silence, thick and suffocating, lingered like an invisible weight pressing down on me. The fog twisted and swirled around the trees, obscuring my vision, and for a moment I thought I saw the shadows shift in the corner of my eye, flickering like dying embers. But when I turned, there was nothing, only the oppressive, thick fog. I continued to walk, the rhythmic crunch of my boots against the damp ground echoing loudly in the stillness, until I came across something strange. At first, it was just a glint in the distance, like sunlight reflecting off glass, but as I drew closer, I realized it wasn't sunlight at all. It was a mirror. But it wasn't like any mirror I'd ever seen. This one was ancient, its frame warped and dark, as if time itself had bent it out of shape. The surface was unnaturally smooth, polished to an eerie sheen despite the decaying surroundings. It stood against a gnarled tree, half obscured by the fog, its reflective surface untouched by the rot and decay around it. It felt out of place, like a forgotten artifact left behind for me to find. I stopped, a strange compulsion drawing me toward it. I hadn't been expecting this reflection, this thing, but I couldn't resist. A part of me urged me to turn away, to keep moving, to leave it alone. But another part of me, the part that had been spiraling into madness ever since I had set foot on this cursed island, wanted to look. As I stepped closer, the mirror seemed to shift, almost as if it were pulling me in. I could see my reflection, but it was distorted, like the glass was warped by something unseen, something that wasn't quite real. My face stared back at me, but it wasn't how I remembered it. The eyes, they were too wide, too hollow, the fear in them almost palpable. My skin was too pale, as though I hadn't seen sunlight in years. But that wasn't the worst of it. It was what changed that made my stomach twist in horror. The reflection of myself smiled. Not a smile I'd ever made. Not one of those genuine, fleeting smiles that crept onto my face when something good happened. No. This smile was wide, too wide, stretching across my face in a grotesque imitation of happiness. It was the smile of someone who had lost everything. And as the reflection grinned, I saw something else in its eyes, something dark. A flash of my past. I wasn't prepared for the onslaught of memories that suddenly rushed back at me, memories I had long buried deep inside, hoping they would stay forgotten. The mirror pulled them to the surface, dredging them up in vivid detail. I saw my family, my mother's face, her eyes filled with concern as she tried to get me to leave this trip behind. I saw the disappointed faces of friends who had warned me, who had told me not to come here, that something about the island was wrong. But the reflection showed me something I wasn't prepared to face. It was the darkest part of me, the part that had always feared being alone, the part that craved recognition, the part that, deep down, was afraid of being forgotten. I saw my reflection twist, my own features warped into something unfamiliar, something darker. It was me, but it wasn't. It was a version of myself that had never existed in reality, a version shaped by the shadows and fears I kept hidden from the world. I watched helplessly as the figure in the mirror mouthed words that weren't my own. "You are nothing." The voice that whispered those words was cold, void of emotion. It was my voice, but it was wrong. Hollow, like it had been dragged through years of torment and decay. The reflection in the mirror seemed to mock me, twisting my own fears into grotesque shapes. Suddenly, my reflection began to move independently. It stepped out of sync with my own movements, grinning wider, its eyes still locked on me with an intensity that made my skin crawl. The air around me grew thick, colder. I reached out to touch the mirror, trying to tear my gaze away, but my hand felt frozen. My fingers brushed against the cold glass, and for a moment, I thought I felt it, something, someone, on the other side, just beyond the reflection. I recoiled, heart pounding. I could feel a pull, a tugging sensation, as though something inside the mirror wanted to drag me in. I pulled back, trying to break free from the hypnotic, terrifying grip the mirror had on me. But my reflection, my other self, did not break away. It stood there, smiling that unholy smile, its eyes never leaving mine. It reached out as if to grab me, its hands long and distorted, fingers like twisted branches. "You can't escape," the voice whispered, and my reflection's mouth moved in time with the words, as if it was alive. "You can't run away from who you are." My pulse raced. I tried to step back, but my legs felt like lead, stuck in place as if the mirror itself was pulling me in. The more I fought it, the more the reflection seemed to stare, unblinking, its grin widening. The fog seemed to thicken around me, growing denser, darker. I could hear the whispers again, clearer now, like a chorus of voices in the background, chanting in a language I couldn't understand. And then, in that same cold, twisted voice, the reflection in the mirror spoke once more. "This island will keep you forever." The words struck me like a punch to the stomach. My breath hitched, panic rising in my throat. The air was heavy, suffocating, pressing against my chest like invisible hands. I couldn't escape. Not from the island. Not from the mirror. I reached up to my face, my trembling hand touching the cold skin, my eyes still locked with my reflections. The smile in the glass grew wider, too wide, and suddenly, I was no longer sure if I was looking at the real me or the twisted version that the island had created. I stumbled backward, shaking. It was as if the mirror had exposed the parts of me that I had tried to hide, the fears and insecurities that I had buried deep within myself. The island wasn't just alive. It was feeding off my doubts, my weaknesses, pulling them to the surface, distorting them into something monstrous. I turned away from the mirror, my breath ragged, my mind whirling. But the images wouldn't leave me. The reflection, the smile, the words, they haunted me, lingering in the air, in my thoughts. And as I ran deeper into the fog, I couldn't shake the feeling that the island had changed me. That I had seen something I was never meant to see. I couldn't escape the feeling that something inside me had cracked. The island, with its shifting fog and unearthly whispers, had slowly chipped away at my sanity. But the reflection in the mirror, it had done something more. It had unraveled me. I couldn't stop thinking about it, about the smile, about the way my reflection had mocked me. The whispers were still with me, too, echoing through the fog, curling around my thoughts like tendrils. I heard them in my head when no one was near. Sometimes, they even felt like my own voice, repeating the same terrible words over and over. You are nothing. What did it mean? Was it a warning? A curse? Or was I just losing my mind? I tried to walk, to move forward, but the path before me seemed to stretch on endlessly, the fog thickening with each step, warping my sense of time and space. The landscape, what little of it I could make out, seemed to shift as well. Trees that had been behind me were suddenly ahead. The ground beneath my feet felt unstable, as though the island itself was alive, breathing, shifting beneath me. I was going in circles, or at least that's what it felt like. It was impossible to tell where I was. The landscape had become a labyrinth of twisted branches and fog-drenched rocks, and the more I tried to make sense of it, the more I felt like I was losing my grip on reality. I couldn't even trust the ground beneath my feet anymore. The once familiar sounds of my boots crunching on gravel had started to distort, as if the very fabric of sound was warping. Now, every step seemed to echo strangely, like I was walking in a vast, empty space, even though I knew I was surrounded by trees. I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting the shadowy figures to be there, watching me, waiting for me to make the next move. And then, there was the fog. The fog had always been thick, yes, but now it was different. It wasn't just mist anymore, it was alive. It swirled in patterns that didn't make sense, twisting and folding on itself as if it were trying to trap me, to corner me. I had a feeling it wasn't just surrounding me, it was watching me. It wasn't just the fog that was changing, though. I felt it deep inside me, in my chest, in my mind, a gnawing, terrifying uncertainty that I couldn't shake. I would turn a corner and find myself looking at the same scene I'd passed before, as if I had never left. The trees, the rocks, the path, it all seemed to repeat itself. And when I turned back, the island's shape shifted again, as if mocking me for trying to make sense of it. And then I heard something that made my heart stop. A voice. My own voice. It whispered from behind me, soft but unmistakable. You're not real. I spun around, my pulse racing. There was no one there, of course. No shadowy figure, no strange creature. Just me, standing alone in the fog. But that voice, it hadn't been in my head. It had come from outside me. I swallowed hard, trying to steady myself. Was I hearing things? Had the island finally driven me mad? I didn't know anymore. I was losing track of time, of where I was, of what was real. I staggered forward, my thoughts spiraling, and then it hit me, the realization that had been creeping up on me for hours. What if the island was inside my mind? What if the island itself wasn't some physical place, but a manifestation of my own thoughts? What if everything around me, the fog, the shadows, the mirror, was just an illusion, a twisted reflection of my mind fracturing under the pressure? What if I had been trapped here all along, not in a physical sense, but in a psychological one? The more I thought about it, the more the world around me felt like it was slipping through my fingers. The fog, the trees, the strange figures, they were just there, shifting, morphing, not quite real. I could feel it in my bones. This was no longer an island, it was my mind, distorted and broken. I tried to rationalize it, to tell myself that I was just imagining it. But the more I tried to reason with myself, the more the feeling of disconnection grew. I could feel the walls of my mind crumbling, brick by brick. Was I really here? Was this island real? Or was I just another lost soul, trapped in my own thoughts? I reached out, touching the nearest tree for stability, but even that felt strange. The bark was rough, but it didn't feel solid, it felt hollow, like it was made of paper, ready to collapse under my touch. I yanked my hand back, shaking. It wasn't real, none of it was. I was losing myself, losing my grasp on reality. And then the whispers started again. You are nothing. The voice wasn't coming from the trees or the fog this time. It was inside me, deep within my skull. I could feel the words vibrating inside my mind, scraping against my thoughts like nails on a chalkboard. I was losing control. The island was feeding on my doubts, my fears. It had started with the mirror, showing me a twisted version of myself. Now it was consuming me whole, forcing me to question everything I thought I knew. Had I been here for days? For weeks? Was I trapped in some sort of time loop, or was the island warping time itself? Was I still me, or had I become something else, something other, something that had been shaped by the island's influence, twisted by its power? My heart raced, my hands shaking as I clutched my head in desperation. I couldn't think straight. The world around me was warping, bending, folding in on itself, and I was being pulled along with it, dragged deeper into the abyss of my own mind. Was I going mad? Or was this island just a part of my own madness? The fog closed in tighter, suffocating. The whispers grew louder. I could hear the island breathing, its heart beating, pulling me closer, tighter, until there was nowhere left to run, nowhere left to hide. And then, as everything around me seemed to collapse into the nothingness, I realized the terrifying truth. I was never going to leave. I wasn't meant to. I was already part of the island, my mind forever trapped in its twisted, unending grip. The realization hit me like a cold, suffocating wave. I had been here before, many times. The fog, the trees, the strange whispers, they weren't just part of the island's bizarre power. They were part of a loop. A cycle. Every step I took, every corner I turned, I found myself drawn back to the same place. The island, it seemed, wasn't just alive, it was aware of me, watching, shifting, adapting to ensure that I stayed trapped within it. Time no longer made sense. It was as though the island itself had stolen it from me. The sun never seemed to rise or set, and the hours bled into one another. At one moment, I would hear the distant cries of gulls, the faint crash of waves on the shore, only to look around and find the landscape unchanged, still, frozen, suffocating under a blanket of dense fog. I tried to count the days, tried to keep track of the time, but each attempt felt more futile than the last. The clocks had stopped working the moment I arrived. My phone, once a reassuring tether to the world outside, no longer displayed anything but an empty screen. The passing of time was a cruel joke here. Every breath, every step, felt like it had happened before, and yet I couldn't remember how long it had been. The trees seemed to mock me. Their gnarled, twisted branches stretched out like skeletal fingers, their bark pulsing with an unnatural life. And the fog was endless. It would recede for moments, giving me a false sense of clarity, only to return, thicker and more oppressive than before. It felt as though it had a mind of its own, swallowing everything, including the very air around me. I tried to make sense of it all. Maybe I was dreaming, maybe I had died, and this was some kind of purgatory. But the more I thought about it, the more the island began to feel like it was alive and aware of my every move. It wasn't just a place, it was a force, an entity that was shaping me, forcing me into this endless cycle, this trap that I couldn't escape. Each time I walked through the fog, each time I stumbled across a familiar landmark, I realized I had been there before. The crumbling stone steps, the ancient oak tree with its roots twisted like veins, the decaying cabin where I had found the diary. It was all the same. I had walked these paths before, but with each return, they had become more distorted, more foreign. The fog seemed to warp the landscape, making it unrecognizable, as though it was mocking my every attempt to break free. I thought I could reason with it. I tried to retrace my steps, to escape the path that kept bringing me back to the same place. But no matter what direction I took, the island shifted. There was no escape. No way out. It was almost as if the island had a consciousness, a will, and it was playing with me, drawing me deeper into its web. I couldn't stop it. I couldn't fight it. And worse still, the longer I stayed here, the more I forgot. Pieces of me were slipping away, like sand through my fingers. At first, it was small things, simple memories, moments I couldn't recall. Then it was more. I couldn't remember how I had gotten here, what had brought me to this island. My past was becoming a blur, slipping out of reach, like a forgotten dream. I wondered if I would even remember my name in a few days. Maybe I was already losing myself. I felt the fog close in tighter, like a vice around my chest. The island wasn't just trapping my body, it was trapping my mind. And the more I tried to fight it, the more it seemed to tighten its grip. I stumbled, falling to my knees, my breath ragged as panic clawed at me. How long had I been here? Hours? Days? Weeks? The uncertainty gnawed at me. The island seemed to mock my inability to escape. The landscape twisted before my eyes, reshaping, reforming like it was alive, moving under my feet, alive with the rhythm of my own fear. I was trapped in a cycle. Every corner I turned, every step I took, I was brought back to the same place, the same fog, the same uncertainty. I was stuck, and I was losing myself. The island was becoming my mind. The fog was swallowing my thoughts, distorting them. The shadows, the whispers, they were becoming part of me, part of this endless loop. I was sinking deeper into the island's grip, and with each passing moment, it felt more and more like I had never been anywhere else. There was no escape. No way out. And for the first time, I realized something truly horrifying. I had never been meant to leave. Desperation clawed at me like a wild animal, its teeth sinking into my chest, gnawing away at whatever remained of my will. I couldn't think straight anymore, couldn't focus on anything but the suffocating fog that closed in around me, the walls of this twisted nightmare pressing tighter with every step I took. I had tried everything to escape. I retraced my steps, hoping that if I just walked in the opposite direction, followed a new path, maybe I could find a way out. But each time, the landscape seemed to shift, like the island was mocking me. The trees that once stood tall and threatening now bent toward me, their gnarled branches seeming to move as if alive. They reached out like hands trying to grab hold of me, to pull me back into their embrace. I tried to swim. I waded into the cold, murky water that surrounded the island, hoping the ocean would offer an escape. But the moment I set foot into the water, it felt wrong in a way that defied logic. The waves didn't crash. They whispered, drawing me further from the shore until the cold water reached my chest. My legs grew heavy, as if the sea itself was pulling me down, holding me there. It wasn't a current. It wasn't even the depth of the water. It was something else, something far darker. It was like the island itself had extended its reach into the ocean, trapping me in its grip. I had even tried to climb the highest cliffs, thinking that if I could just get above the fog, I might see beyond the endless mist, find some sign of land, some point of reference, some way out. But when I reached the top, my heart sank. The view didn't reveal the world beyond. Instead, I was greeted by more fog, thicker, denser, swirling as though it had no end. There was nothing beyond it. Just endless, oppressive nothing. My attempts to escape were met with failure after failure. Nothing I did worked. No matter where I went, the island always pulled me back. Even my own thoughts began to betray me. I tried to keep track of the days, writing in the damp pages of the ruined diary I had found, but the words blurred together. The pages felt like they were absorbing my despair, and no matter how hard I tried to record the time, I couldn't remember the last time I'd written or what had happened in between. It was as if time was slipping through my fingers. Everything I did, every attempt to escape, only deepened the hopelessness. I'd wander aimlessly, trying to find a way to stop the island from warping around me, but all the paths led me in circles. The trees that once seemed ominous now felt oppressive, suffocating in their constant presence. Even the animals, the birds, the small creatures in the underbrush had begun to disappear, leaving the island eerily silent, as if it were waiting for me to break. I couldn't remember what was real anymore. Was this a dream? Was this a nightmare I would wake up from? Or was I really trapped in this place, trapped in my own mind, twisted into this endless cycle of despair? I had no answers. Just the fog, the whispers, and the feeling of something watching me, pressing in closer with every step. There was nothing left to try. I sank to my knees, overwhelmed by a crushing wave of hopelessness. What was I supposed to do? The realization began to settle deep inside me. It had been creeping in for days, but now it was undeniable. I was trapped. I had been trapped from the very beginning. The island wasn't just a place, it was my prison, and it would never let me go. No matter what I tried, no matter how far I walked or how hard I screamed for help, I was never going to escape. The island had claimed me, and it was impossible to break free. It wasn't just the physical walls, the fog, the shifting trees, the endless water. It was deeper than that. The island was inside me now. It had infected my thoughts, my very sense of self. The longer I stayed here, the more I felt like I was becoming part of the island. My body, my mind, they were slipping into the fog, becoming part of the cycle. I had no way out. No way to escape. The hopelessness started to seep into my bones, and I couldn't even bring myself to fight it anymore. The island had broken me. And as the fog closed in, as the shadows crept closer, I realized I had been defeated by the island and by myself. There was no escape. Only endless, unyielding despair. I thought I had seen the worst of it. I thought the island's cruel grasp had already shown me all its horrors. But what I came across next shattered whatever fragile sense of hope I had left. It happened on the edge of the island, near a narrow path that I hadn't noticed before. I was desperate to find anything that could explain how to leave this place. My thoughts were jumbled, but one thing was clear. I had to keep moving, or else the island would swallow me whole, just like it had swallowed everything else. The path was overgrown with thick vines, but as I pushed through, I saw something that made my blood run cold. The first thing I noticed was the scent, a stale, damp odor that was distinctly human, yet old and decayed. It was a smell of death, but also of something more insidious, something that felt like it had been here for far longer than I had. The wind carried the scent toward me, and I hesitated, a chill running down my spine. As I crept forward, the fog parted just enough to reveal a scene that stopped me dead in my tracks. There, amidst the twisted trees and fog-choked earth, were the remains of what could only be described as ghostly apparitions. They weren't full forms, not exactly. They were like fragmented echoes of people, shapes, shadows, and indistinct figures that had once been human but now felt more like lingering memories of those who had been lost to this place. Some of them were barely visible, their outlines flickering in and out like a broken reflection in a mirror. Others were more solid, yet their faces were blank, empty. Their eyes were wide open, but there was nothing behind them, just the hollow stare of souls consumed by this island. They weren't alive. They weren't dead. They were something in between, as though the island had erased them, erased everything they had been. I stepped closer, my heart pounding. I wanted to run, to turn and flee, but my legs felt frozen to the spot. My eyes followed the figures, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. One figure, an old man, his clothes torn and ragged, was standing near a rotting tree stump, his hands trembling as if he were still holding something in them. His lips moved, but no sound came from his mouth. There was something familiar in his movements, in the way he looked around. It was like he was waiting for something, waiting for someone. Then it hit me. These were the others, the people who had come before me, people who had somehow found their way to this island, just like I had. But they weren't here anymore, not in any meaningful way. The island had consumed them, consumed their minds, their memories, until there was nothing left but the empty shell of who they had once been. I approached one of the figures, a woman this time, her eyes hollow, her body frail and barely standing. She wore a torn jacket, one that looked like it had been worn for years. Her face was gaunt, and when I looked into her eyes, I saw no recognition, just the same vacant emptiness I had seen in the others. "Where am I?" I whispered, my voice breaking the eerie silence. Her lips trembled, and she spoke, but the words were nonsensical, a jumble of fragmented thoughts. I couldn't make sense of it. It was like she didn't know who she was, or where she had come from. Her memories had been erased, her identity stripped away by the island's overwhelming power. I backed away, my mind racing, trying to hold on to some shred of clarity. But as I moved, the fog seemed to swirl tighter around me. I glanced back at the woman, her eyes had followed me. And in that instant, I realized something that sent my pulse racing. She wasn't just staring at me. She was watching me, as I was now, not as I had been. It was like she recognized something about me, something in my eyes, something she had forgotten about herself. Was this going to happen to me too? Would I soon become just another ghost, lost to the island, my memories wiped away like the others? The thought sent a wave of panic through me. I wanted to run, to scream, to tear myself away from this nightmare, but I couldn't. The figures around me, they weren't just dead or lost, they were trapped in a cycle. The island had stolen their memories, their pasts, and now it was using them to ensure that no one ever left. As I looked back at the man by the tree stump, I realized that he was no longer standing still. He was moving slowly toward me, his feet dragging as though he were drawn to me. His lips moved again, but this time I could hear the faintest whisper, like the rustling of dead leaves. "You can't escape." The words were soft, but they were clear. The island had consumed him. It had consumed all of them. They were trapped, lost to its power, with nothing left but their echoes, their fragmented souls, forever circling in the fog. I turned away, my mind screaming for an escape I knew I would never find. The ghosts lingered, but they didn't speak to me anymore. They didn't need to. I understood now. I wasn't just stuck on the island. The island was inside me, now. I didn't know what I had expected, but it wasn't this. As I wandered deeper into the island, every step I took felt like I was being pulled into something far worse than just an endless cycle of confusion. The fog was thicker here, swirling in unnatural patterns, like it had a life of its own. I could barely see more than a few feet in front of me, and every whisper of the wind felt like a warning. But something else, something much more sinister, was lurking. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light, or maybe another shadowy figure from the past. I was growing accustomed to seeing things that weren't entirely there, so I ignored the growing unease in my chest, the way the air seemed to grow heavier around me. But when I heard the voice, a low, deep whisper in the fog, it was impossible to ignore. The voice called my name. It was soft at first, like a murmur on the edge of hearing. But then it came again, louder this time, echoing through the dense mist. "You are mine." I froze. I knew I should have turned and run, but my body refused to move. It was like the very air around me had solidified, keeping me rooted in place, trapped in the sound of that voice. I couldn't even tell if it was real or if I had finally lost my mind completely. The fog thickened, swirling in tighter circles, suffocating the light that had once guided my path. And then I saw it. At first, it was just a shadow in the mist, an indistinct shape that seemed to flicker in and out of existence. But as I stared, it became more defined, a figure, tall and looming, standing at the edge of the clearing. The entity was not human. Its shape was fluid, like smoke, constantly shifting and bending, its outline barely visible as it moved through the fog. But the presence it exuded was anything but ethereal. It was terrifying, a feeling that sank deep into my bones, crushing all my ability to think. The figure didn't speak, but I could hear it now, its thoughts not just in my ears, but in my mind, as though it had invaded my very consciousness. "You cannot escape. Not now. Not ever." The words weren't just a declaration, they were a command, an order that shattered my will, leaving me utterly powerless. Every thought I tried to form seemed to dissolve, swallowed by its presence. I tried to move, tried to run, but my body refused to respond. The island itself seemed to pull me back, the ground beneath my feet turning to quicksand, making it impossible to escape. The entity stepped closer, its form shifting with a fluid grace that only made it more terrifying. It was not made of flesh or bone, it was made of something else, something I couldn't comprehend. I felt it wrap around my mind, sinking into every thought, every fear, like it was feeding on them, feeding on me. You are not the first to wander here, but you will be the last. The voice reverberated inside my skull. My heart hammered in my chest. I wanted to scream, to fight back, but all I could do was stand there, trembling, helpless. My mind raced, looking for a way out, any way to resist this thing. But it was pointless. Every thought that tried to make sense of the situation was shattered by its presence. I could feel it pulling my memories, my sense of self, as if it were erasing me piece by piece. I thought back to the people I had known before I came here, the life I once had. But now, even those memories were slipping through my fingers like sand. I couldn't remember who I was anymore. I couldn't remember what it had felt like to be human, to be anything other than trapped in this place. The entity's form shifted again, this time growing darker, more solid. Its presence became overwhelming, suffocating, and in the briefest moment, I saw its true face, not in the conventional sense, but in the overwhelming feeling that I was in the presence of something far older and more powerful than anything I had ever encountered. Its face was a void, an empty, endless blackness that swallowed all light, all hope. It spoke again, its voice more forceful this time, as though it was shaping the very fabric of reality with its words, "You will remain. Forever. The island feeds on you, and in turn, you will feed it. Time means nothing here. You will never escape the fog, the shadows. You are part of it now." The ground beneath me trembled, and I could feel the island itself shifting, the very land I stood on changing, bending, twisting to the entity's will. The air grew cold, colder than anything I had ever experienced, a chill that went beyond the physical into the very core of my soul. I wanted to scream. I wanted to fight. But all I could do was stand there, trembling, frozen in place. The entity's words filled my mind, suffocating every shred of resistance, every ounce of fight I had left. I understood now. I wasn't just trapped on this island. The island was inside me, and it had always been. The fog, the shadows, the whispers, they weren't just external forces. They were part of me, reflections of a mind slowly being consumed, piece by piece. And the worst part? The worst part was that I knew I would never leave. The entity had seen to that. It was the master of this place, and I was its prisoner. The fog thickened again, and I could feel it closing in around me, swallowing everything. I was no longer sure if I had ever existed outside of this island. The island had claimed me. And now, I was nothing more than a remnant. The fog clung to me like a living thing, curling around my limbs and seeping into my mind. I could feel it, each tendril of mist twisting into the core of my thoughts, distorting everything I had once known. For a brief, fleeting moment, I thought I understood the island's power. But now, the truth was clearer than ever before. The entity, the thing that controlled this place, had shown me just a fraction of its vast, horrific dominion. It wasn't just the landscape that twisted here. It wasn't only the shifting shadows or the disorienting time loops that kept me in this hellish prison. No, the island was alive. Not alive in the sense of breathing or living flesh, but alive in a way that consumed everything that dared to step foot on it. Souls. Memories. Time. It fed on them, twisted them, and then kept them bound in an endless cycle of repetition, trapping them here forever. Every person who came to this cursed place became part of its eternal loop. I had seen the ghosts, the fractured figures of those who had been lost. But they weren't just trapped here in the physical sense. Their souls had been devoured, and now they were caught in a never-ending cycle, forced to relive the moments of their arrival over and over, forever. The island didn't just erase them, it broke them down, piece by piece, until they were nothing but hollow echoes of their former selves. I was next. I had been pulled into its web the moment I set foot on its shores. The fog that enveloped me wasn't just an environmental effect, it was the manifestation of the island's hunger. Each whisper I heard, each shadow I saw, wasn't just a random occurrence. They were the island's way of consuming me, drawing out every last ounce of my essence. The island didn't care about the passage of time. It didn't care about the world outside of it. Time here was a fabric it could bend and tear apart, stretching it into eternity until every soul that entered became nothing more than a fading memory, lost to the fog. I looked around, my heart pounding in my chest. The island's grip on me was tightening. Every moment I spent here, the fog grew thicker, the air colder, and the shadows darker. But it wasn't just the physical surroundings that were suffocating me. The island was inside my mind, warping my perception, blurring the line between what was real and what wasn't. The island was a place of torment. It didn't want me to escape. It wanted to break me, to consume me completely. I could feel its presence everywhere. Its fingers were embedded deep in my soul, pulling at my very thoughts. And then it hit me, all at once. This was how the island had enslaved everyone who had come before me. This was how it had twisted their minds, turned them into shadows of who they had once been. The island didn't just keep people physically trapped. It didn't need to. It trapped them in their own minds, forcing them to relive the same moments, the same fears, the same memories, again and again, until there was nothing left of who they were. It took their essence, their very souls, and held them in an eternal, suffocating cycle of torment. There was no escape. I tried to run. I tried to think of some way out, some way to break free from this hell. But the more I struggled, the more the island twisted around me. The land itself seemed to shift, to mock me as I stumbled through the fog, desperately searching for any sign of hope. But there was nothing. Only endless, shifting mist, broken memories, and the sounds of distant whispers, echoes of those who had already lost their way. I began to understand, then, that time didn't exist here. The island wasn't just a place, it was a prison built from the twisted remnants of lost souls. A prison that existed outside the flow of reality, outside the flow of time. There was no escape. There would never be. The shadows that had haunted me, the whispers that had driven me to madness, they weren't just part of the island. They were the island. And they were inside me, now. I thought back to everything I had experienced, everything I had gone through to get here. I thought about the people I had known, the life I had left behind. But the memories were already slipping away, becoming foggy, distant. I couldn't remember who I was, or if I had ever been someone else. All that remained was this island. All that remained was the cycle. I wasn't even sure how long I had been here anymore. I couldn't remember when I had first arrived, or how many days, weeks, or months had passed since I set foot on this cursed land. The island had erased it all. The worst part? I realized that the island didn't just trap souls, it fed on them. It fed on their fear, their pain, their confusion. And as my mind broke down, as my memories faded, I became part of the island, a fragment of its never-ending torment. I wasn't the first. And I wouldn't be the last. The fog closed in around me again, and I felt it, the pull. The island was claiming me, just as it had claimed so many others. There would be no escape, no way to leave. I would become a part of the island's endless cycle, forever lost in the fog, forever trapped in the void. The island had won. and I was nothing but another lost soul in its eternal grasp. I can't tell how much time has passed since I last saw the sun, or if I even remember what the sun felt like. The fog never leaves, it just thickens and recedes in constant, suffocating waves. I don't know what's real anymore. The island has done this to me, I'm sure of it. It's made me question everything, the ground beneath my feet, the very air I breathe, the thoughts in my own head. It's all slipping away, and I don't know how to hold on. I thought I could keep my sanity, that I could resist the pull, the relentless pressure of this place. But it's wearing me down, bit by bit, like waves eroding a cliff. Each moment feels like a blur, a distortion of what came before. I hear the whispers, soft at first, barely a murmur, and then they grow louder, filling the space around me until they drown out every other sound. "You're not real," one of them says. And I wonder, are they right? Sometimes I think I see things, familiar faces in the fog. People I once knew, people I loved. But when I try to call out to them, they vanish, slipping away like smoke. The faces, the voices, they twist and melt into something else, something that I don't recognize. And then I see them again, only to realize I've been walking in circles, caught in the same place. The same spot. Is it me, or is the island changing? I try to remind myself of who I am, where I came from. But the memories, they slip through my fingers. I try to hold on to them, to grasp at the fragments of a life that feels more and more distant. There was a life once, wasn't there? A life before the fog, before the island, before the shadows began to take shape around me. But now I don't know what's real anymore. The island is distorting everything, turning it into a nightmare of disjointed fragments. I walked toward what seemed to be a clearing, only to find myself back at the same crumbling building I had passed before. The same broken windows, the same decaying structure. How is this possible? And the worst part? The shifting. It's not just the landscape changing, not just the fog that seems to pulse with an unnatural energy. It's everything. Time doesn't follow any rules here. It bends. It shifts. I can't trust my own eyes. One moment, I'll see something, a path leading out, an opening in the fog, and then, the next moment, it's gone. Vanished. Like it was never there at all. I've found myself in places I don't recognize, surrounded by the haunting silence, only to hear a distant voice calling out to me. "Wake up," it whispers. "You're still here." But when I turn around, there's no one there. Nothing but fog and shadows and that sense of being watched. What is real? My hands shake as I try to steady myself, to breathe, to think. But it's all coming undone. Every step I take feels like I'm walking through a dream or a nightmare. The ground under my feet seems to undulate like the surface of water, unstable, uncertain. My mind tries to hold onto something concrete, but it slips like grains of sand. Am I even still me? I feel like a ghost, like the very essence of who I was is dissolving into the island, becoming part of its never-ending cycle. I can't tell if the memories I have are mine, or if the island has just manufactured them. I see flashes of my past, but they feel like someone else's life, someone else's thoughts. The more I struggle to remember, the more I lose. And then, I hear the voice again. "You're already gone." I spin around, but there's no one there. My pulse quickens, my heart hammering in my chest. Is it the island speaking? Is it a memory of something that's already been lost? Or is it my own mind unraveling, breaking under the pressure? I wish I could wake up. I wish I could feel something solid under my feet. I wish I could remember what it was like to belong somewhere, to know that I existed outside of this place, outside of this nightmare. But each time I think I have a grip on reality, it slips away, like water through my fingers. The fog closes in again, thicker now. I stumble, disoriented, my mind racing, but nothing makes sense. Nothing stays still. The shadows shift and warp, and I realize I'm no longer sure if I'm standing in the same place or if this island has become my mind, twisted, distorted, endless. I feel the weight of the island pressing against me, forcing me down. It's like it knows I'm losing control. Like it's pulling me deeper into its grasp. And then I hear it, the worst thing of all. The voice, clearer now, as if it's inside me, not just in my ears. You're not leaving. You never were. And in that moment, I understand. This isn't just an island. This is a place designed to break you. To make you question everything you are. The fog, the shadows, the distorted time, it's all part of the illusion, part of the trap. And I am already lost. The question isn't whether I will leave, it's whether I can even remember what it was like to be someone who ever could. I close my eyes, trying to hold on to the slivers of my past, but they slip away faster now, like dreams fading at dawn. I don't know how much longer I can keep pretending I'm still me. The fog is pressing in again, thick and suffocating, almost tangible. It's like the island is trying to swallow me whole, blotting out everything around me, leaving me alone in this suffocating void. I can't breathe. I can't think. The air feels thick, dense, and every step I take feels heavier than the last. My heart is beating too fast. My mind is racing. Thoughts swirl in an endless storm, and I can't stop them. Memories come flooding back in bits and pieces, fragments of a life that feels less and less real. A house. A family. Faces I recognize, but not quite. Were they real? Were they ever real? I try to grasp onto the images, to make sense of them, but they slip through my fingers like sand. I see myself in places I should remember, but I can't place them. A kitchen table where we ate dinner, a hallway with photos hanging on the walls. But they feel so distant, as if someone else is living those moments, not me. My name feels wrong. It's there on the edge of my mind, taunting me, just out of reach. Was I always called this? Is this my name? It sounds foreign now, like it belongs to someone else. I clutch my head, as if trying to stop the flood of memories that don't belong to me. But they keep coming. They keep tearing through me, each one more fractured than the last. Who am I? The question keeps echoing in my mind, louder and louder. I try to remember, try to dig through the fog and find something solid. Anything. But the more I search, the more everything blurs. I see myself standing in a room. But the room is different. No. It's the same room, but the walls shift. The windows are here one moment, gone the next. How could I have lived in a place like this? How could I have believed these memories? I hear a voice calling me. It's soft, distant, but familiar. I turn, and for a brief moment, I think I see someone. A woman, standing in the mist. She's smiling at me, and her face feels like something I should know. But then I blink, and she's gone. Vanished. I freeze. Was that real? Did I just see that? Or was it just another trick of the island? The fog? The shadows? I don't know anymore. The boundaries between the world I came from and this twisted place are becoming increasingly blurred. I stumble forward, my legs weak, my mind spinning. Everything I see, everything I feel, is slipping away from me. The ground feels unstable beneath my feet, and I can't trust anything anymore. My reflection in the glass of a broken window catches my eye. But the reflection is wrong. It's not me. I don't look like me. The face staring back is older, gaunter. The eyes, hollow, empty. I try to reach for it, to touch the glass and ground myself in something, anything, but when my fingers meet the surface, I feel nothing. The glass is cold, too cold. Like it's not even there. The world is a blur of broken images, of fractured pieces of a life I don't even recognize. And then the worst part. A thought, no, a feeling, starts creeping in like a dark shadow in the corner of my mind. What if I've never been anyone? What if all these memories, all these faces, all these places, they're just fabrications? What if I've been here, on this island, forever? What if this whole life, this whole identity, is just an illusion, a trick the island is playing on me? A shiver runs down my spine, and I feel a deep, suffocating cold in my chest. I try to breathe, but it's like the air is being pulled out of me. I'm drowning in the fog, in the endless confusion. I remember a conversation, a voice that sounds familiar, yet distant. You'll forget, the voice says. You'll forget everything. You'll forget who you were before. I don't know who said it. I don't know if it was me or someone else. The words echo in my mind, but they don't make sense. They're not my words, are they? I try to hold on to something, anything, but it's like reaching for the edge of a dream. Nothing stays still. I've been walking for hours, or maybe days. It's impossible to tell. The fog warps everything. Time warps. I look around at the same twisted trees, the same decaying structures. They feel like memories, not real things. I don't know where I am anymore. A figure moves in the distance. A silhouette in the fog. I should be afraid. But instead, I feel drawn to it. It's familiar, somehow. I can't remember why, but it feels like I know it, like I've seen this figure before. I stumble toward it, desperate for some answer, some connection to my past. The figure turns, and for a brief, fleeting moment, I think I see the face of me. A distorted, fragmented version of myself. But it's just as quickly gone, replaced by shadows, by mist, by nothing. The question is still there, gnawing at me, louder now. Who am I? I can't answer. I don't know anymore. The memories I've tried so hard to hold onto are disintegrating in my mind, like ash in the wind. I can't tell where the fog ends and I begin. I'm losing myself. And I'm starting to wonder if I ever really existed at all. I take another step forward, but everything around me shifts again. The ground beneath my feet disappears, and I fall, tumbling into the fog. And just before I hit the ground, I hear it again. That voice, distant but clear. You're not real. And for the first time, I don't know how to argue with it. I've tried everything. Every corner of the island. Every path. Every direction. I've run until my legs felt like they would break. I've screamed until my throat bled, hoping someone, anyone, would hear me, would come for me. But all I get in response is the crushing silence of the fog, the whispering wind, and the slow, rhythmic thumping of my own heartbeat. There is no one. There is nothing. And I think I've finally realized why. I've been running towards something. Something I can't name, but I know it's there, waiting, pulling me in like a magnet. It's the heart of the island. I can feel it in the air now, the weight, the pressure. There's something alive here. Something watching. It feels like I've been drawn into its very core, like it's been guiding me, leading me, all along. I stop at the edge of a clearing, breathing heavily. The fog is thick, swirling around me like a living thing. My body aches, every part of me screaming for rest, but I can't stop. I can't give in. Not now. I look ahead, and there it is, the darkness. Not a shadow, but a physical mass. It's hard to describe, a void that seems to swallow the light itself, thick and impenetrable. It pulses, like it's breathing. And I just know, this is where the island's power lies. This is what's been controlling everything. The time loops. The whispers. The shadows. It's all coming from this. The fog seems to part just enough for me to see the outline of a structure. Tall and jagged, like the ruins of some ancient temple, but it's completely foreign. It doesn't belong here. It feels like it shouldn't even exist, like it's a part of the island's strange and unnatural geometry. A building, or something else. I can't tell. I don't know if it's something I've seen before, or if it's been created just for me. Just for this moment. I move forward, cautiously, every instinct screaming at me to turn back. But I can't. Not now. The air grows colder as I approach, and the weight of the island presses down harder on my chest. The fog coils around my legs like a serpent, dragging at my every step. When I finally reach the structure, it feels as if the island itself has closed in around me. I can't move. I can't breathe. There's no escape, no more paths left to take. I'm trapped, standing before something far older, far more powerful than anything I can comprehend. The entrance to the structure is nothing more than a dark opening, a gaping mound in the side of the ruin. The air around it feels electric, like it's crackling with unseen energy. I hesitate for a moment. I don't know if I should go in. But then I hear the voice again. It's inside my head now, louder than ever. And it's not just one voice, but many. Hundreds. Thousands. All speaking at once. It's a cacophony of whispers, of screams, all coming from this place. You can't leave, they say, and I realize with a sickening certainty that the voices are not speaking to me. They're speaking for me. You are already here. And that's when it hits me. I'm not the first to try and escape. I'm not the first to arrive here. I'm part of the curse. I wasn't just drawn here. I've been here before. The memories flood back again, like a tidal wave crashing over me. I see flashes of my own death, the drowning, the suffocating darkness, the hopelessness. I see myself arriving on the island, just like I did this time, just like all the others before me. The cycle. It never ends. The island doesn't just trap bodies. It traps souls, over and over, like a never-ending cycle of torment. And I was always meant to be part of it. I feel a surge of rage, of desperation, surging through me. I slam my fist against the stone of the structure, my heart pounding in my chest. No! I scream. I'm not one of you. But the moment the words leave my mouth, I feel it. The power of the island, the curse, sinking deep into my bones. It's all around me. It's inside me. The ground trembles beneath my feet. The fog thickens, becomes denser, as if the island is listening, responding to my defiance. I hear the whispers again, louder now, all-encompassing, filling my head until there's nothing left but the voices. You've always been here, they chant. Always. The walls of the structure begin to close in, the stone shifting and moving like it's alive. My feet won't move. My body is frozen. The island is pulling me back in, pulling me into its dark embrace. The shadows grow long, stretch toward me like arms, like fingers. And then I realize the island has been shaping me, shaping my memories, my identity. I was never meant to leave. My escape was always an illusion. The island feeds on those who wander too far into its grasp, twisting their minds until they forget everything and become part of it. Part of the eternal, unbroken cycle. I reach out, but it's too late. The fog pulls me in, and I can feel the pull of the island, dragging me deeper, past the ruins, past the structure, deeper into its heart. The memories, the faces, everything begins to fade until I am nothing but a whisper, nothing but a forgotten echo in the fog. And I understand now. There is no escape. There never was. The island is me, and I am part of it. Forever. I can feel it creeping in. At first, it was just a whisper. A tiny crack in the foundation of my mind. The fog, the voices, the shifting shadows, all of it was already too much. But now it's like a tidal wave crashing over me, drowning me in its weight. The island, it doesn't just control the environment. It controls my thoughts, my very self. I'm not just fighting to escape anymore. I'm fighting to remember who I am. There are moments when I forget my own name. My reflection in the mirror-like object I found earlier, it wasn't mine. It didn't feel like me. I don't know when it stopped feeling like me. I'm surrounded by unfamiliar faces, and yet I can't tell if they're real. Are they trapped like I am? Or are they part of the island, like the fog, like the shadows, like me? I think of my past. I try to pull together the pieces of who I once was, but the more I try, the more they slip away. The memories are fragile, like thin shards of glass that shatter the moment I touch them. Was I always meant to be here? Was I always meant to become this? I press my hands to my face, trying to steady myself. The ground beneath me shakes, the world tilting in every direction. The air is thick, heavy with the weight of something unseen. The whispers, they never stop. They swirl around me, clawing at my thoughts. You can't leave, they chant over and over. You're part of it now. You always have been. I scream, the sound tearing from my throat. It's a sound of pure frustration, but it does nothing. It's swallowed by the island, just like everything else. I drop to my knees, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The darkness around me begins to shift, like a living thing. I can feel it closing in, surrounding me, pushing me into a corner. I get up, staggering, and stumble forward. There's no clear path. Just more fog. More shadows. The island is playing with me. It always has been. The landscape shifts before my eyes, and with each step, I lose more of myself. But it's not just the island that's against me now. It's me. My own mind. The more I fight, the more I feel myself slipping away. I try to recall the sounds of the world before the fog, before the island, anything that feels real. The sound of birds, the hum of traffic, the chatter of voices. But it's all fading. All I hear now is the endless whispering, the pulsing of the island's dark heart, and my own breath, shallow and ragged, in my ears. There's a sensation, a familiar pull, that I can't explain. It's like the island is reaching inside me, plucking at the strings of my thoughts, unraveling me. It's harder and harder to think straight, to remember where I've been, who I am. Is this what happened to the others? Did they break like I am breaking now? Did they give in? I clutch my head in my hands, my fingers digging into my scalp. The pressure is unbearable. The thoughts aren't mine. They're alien, foreign. They're the island's. You are nothing, the whispers say. You are already lost. I want to scream. I want to cry. I want to fight. But what if I can't? What if the island isn't just trying to trap me, but trying to become me? What if I'm already part of it, and I don't even know it? What if I've been here so long that I've forgotten I was ever anyone else? I stagger forward, barely able to keep my feet under me. The shadows seem to move, curling around me, like they know, like they're waiting for me to crack completely. I turn to look behind me. The path is gone. It's just more fog, endless and suffocating. I want to scream again, but no sound comes out. I don't even know if I can anymore. I look down at my hands. They're not mine. They're pale, almost translucent, trembling. I don't remember them being like this. I don't remember me being like this. The fog swirls around me once more, and I feel the weight of the island pressing in, suffocating me, pulling me apart from the inside out. I try to run, to move, but I'm not sure which direction I'm going. The world is shifting, collapsing into itself. I think I'm losing myself. I think I'm becoming the island. The realization hits me with a cold, crushing wave. The more I try to hold on to myself, the more I become part of it. There's no escape. The island is me, and I am its prisoner. Forever. And then, everything goes black. The fog wraps around me, dense and suffocating, but it's not just the mist that traps me anymore. I feel the island, its presence, everywhere. It's in the air, in the very ground beneath my feet, and deep within my mind. The island is a living thing, and it knows me, every thought, every fear, every doubt. It's been pulling at me for so long now, and I wonder if I've already been lost. If I've already succumbed to its hold and don't even realize it. I wonder if this moment, this choice, is just another illusion, another trick the island has set for me. But there's one thing I know for sure. I'm tired. I'm tired of running, tired of fighting, tired of pretending I can find a way out when I feel like the very essence of the island has seeped into my bones. I can't escape. The path is gone, the fog is too thick, and my mind is slipping further with each passing second. The voices, they never stop. They're so loud now, like a chorus of screams echoing in my skull. Give in, they whisper. Let go. You're part of it. You always have been. I feel myself weakening, like I'm about to crumble under the weight of it all. The fog is thickening, and my vision blurs. The shadows move around me, whispering my name, calling me to join them. To give in. To become one with the island. But is that really the only option? There's a part of me, a small, distant part that refuses to let go. A part that remembers, a part that isn't yet consumed by the fog, by the shadows, by the curse of this place. That part is screaming at me, begging me to find the origin, the source of the island's power, the force that controls this endless cycle, the one thing that can stop all of this. I don't know how much time I have left before I lose myself completely, before I become just another whisper in the fog. But I know one thing, I have to try. The island wants me to break. It wants me to succumb to its power, to accept that there is no escape. But there must be something. Some part of the island's dark heart that can be destroyed. The idea feels almost impossible. The island's influence on me is so overwhelming, so all-consuming, that even thinking about confronting it feels like a death wish. What if the island doesn't just trap me in time, it traps my very soul? What if confronting it means I never come back? I look around. The fog swirls like a living entity, tugging at my consciousness, but in the distance, I see a faint flicker of light, something shining through the darkness. It's not much. It's barely noticeable. But it's enough. Enough for me to grasp onto, enough to fuel the small ember of hope still burning inside me. Maybe, just maybe, I can find the heart of this place. But that decision is life-altering. If I fail, if I make the wrong choice, I'll never leave. I'll become one of them, lost forever to the island's curse. But if I succeed, maybe I can free myself and the others. Maybe I can break the cycle, destroy whatever dark force controls this place, and finally escape. I take a step forward, my body trembling, my mind fighting the overwhelming desire to stay, to give in to the voices, to allow myself to vanish into the fog. But I can't. I won't. I push forward, each step a battle. The shadows move with me, pressing against me like a physical weight. The whispers grow louder, but I block them out. The fog shifts again, the air growing colder. I feel a shift, like the island itself is watching me, waiting for me to break. But I don't stop. I can feel the flicker of light growing stronger now, closer. It's not just a light. It's the truth. The truth of this island, of what it really is, of why it traps those who wander too far. I need to find the heart of it. I need to destroy whatever force keeps it alive, keeps it feeding on the souls of the lost. I push on, my heart pounding in my chest, my mind barely able to hold on to the thought. The shadows around me grow heavier, almost tangible, like they're trying to pull me back into the abyss. I hear them, feel them, but I refuse to let them claim me. And then, I reach it. The source. A structure, dark and foreboding, stands in the distance, like a temple, like a prison, like the heart of all things twisted and broken on this island. The light comes from within, flickering like a fragile flame in the midst of the storm. I take a deep breath, my hands shaking, my body trembling with the weight of the decision. This is it. This is the moment. I can either succumb to the darkness, let it consume me, or I can confront the source, challenge the island's power, and try to break free once and for all. It's a life-changing decision, but it's the only one I have left. I walk forward into the light. I've made my choice. There's no going back now. The island is pushing against me, trying to drag me under with its oppressive weight. The fog wraps around me, even thicker than before, each step I take more difficult than the last. It's like the very air is alive, fighting to keep me here, to keep me trapped within its endless grip. The island is a maze of madness, and every inch I move forward feels like a small victory against an enemy that's too powerful to comprehend. have no other choice. The whispers are growing louder now, more desperate, more insistent. They claw at the edges of my mind, twisting my thoughts into knots, pulling at the very core of my being. Come back, they murmur, their voices cold and hollow. You can't win. You belong here. You always have. The fog swirls around me, dense and oppressive. It's as if the island itself is alive, breathing with me, shifting with me. The landscape around me is distorted, the trees bend at unnatural angles, their branches twisting like skeletal fingers reaching out from the dark. The ground beneath me feels uneven, almost as if it's shifting with every step I take. But I keep going. The farther I move, the more unstable the world becomes. The fog thickens, wrapping itself around my legs, making every step feel like I'm trudging through wet sand. The air grows colder, biting into my skin, and I can feel the island's grip tightening. The ground beneath my feet trembles, and the trees around me creak, as though the island is groaning, frustrated with my defiance. I pause for a moment, trying to steady myself, trying to regain some semblance of control. But it's impossible. The air is heavy, thick with something dark and ancient. The very fabric of reality seems to be stretching, bending, warping as if the island itself is not just a place, but an entity, a force of nature. I look around, but everything is distorted, twisted. The fog blocks my vision, making it impossible to see more than a few feet in front of me. The landscape is shifting constantly, changing like a living puzzle. One moment, there's a path leading straight ahead. The next, it's gone, replaced by an endless sea of trees that seem to close in on me from all sides. I can hear it now, the hum of the island. It's subtle at first, just a faint vibration in the air, but it grows stronger with each passing second. It's like a pulse, a heartbeat, resonating in the very earth beneath my feet. The fog seems to pulse in time with it, the mist undulating like a living creature, breathing in and out, alive with energy. And the shadows, they're everywhere. I catch glimpses of them out of the corner of my eye, darting between the trees, moving in ways that don't make sense. They twist and turn, flicker and fade, but always there, always. Watching. They're waiting for me to make a mistake, waiting for me to falter. I can feel their eyes on me, their presence pressing in from all directions. I try to push forward, but the ground beneath me suddenly gives way, and I stumble, nearly falling. The fog shifts around me, and the earth trembles again, a violent shake that nearly knocks me off my feet. The trees groan, their trunks cracking and twisting, as though the island itself is in pain, or maybe it's celebrating my struggle, enjoying the fear that's building in me with every passing moment. I can feel the pull again. It's stronger now, the magnetic force of the island dragging me back toward its heart. My legs feel heavy, as though I'm wading through thick mud, each step a battle against the force that's trying to reclaim me. The path I was following is gone now, replaced by a dense thicket of trees that seem to close in around me, trapping me further. The air smells damp and thick, like decay. And then, the first shadow steps forward. I freeze. It's not just a shape in the fog. It's solid, a figure that seems to take shape before me, emerging from the mist like it's made of the very fog itself. It's tall, its form cloaked in shadows, its features indistinct but haunting. The thing moves slowly, almost deliberately, like it's studying me, measuring me. The whispers grow louder, more frantic, and I can hear them clearly now, speaking directly to me. You should have stayed. You should have accepted it. It's too late now. The figure steps closer, and I can feel its presence like a weight pressing against me. My heart races, and every instinct tells me to run, but I stand frozen, rooted to the spot, caught in the island's grasp. The figure's shape flickers, like the shadows are playing tricks on me, and I can't tell if it's real, if it's truly here, or if it's just another illusion the island is throwing at me. I take a step back, my breath shallow, but the figure doesn't move. It just stands there, watching, waiting. Suddenly, the ground shakes violently again, throwing me off balance. The figure doesn't flinch. It remains still, a silent observer of my struggle, as if the island has created it solely to torment me, to remind me that I'm trapped, that there is no escape. I take another step back, then another, but the island won't let me go. It's all closing in, the fog thicker than ever, the shadows watching, waiting for me to break. But I can't. I can't give in. I push forward again, my feet heavy, but each step is a defiance. The figure looms larger in my mind than in reality, its presence no more than a projection of my own fears. It's not real, I tell myself. This is the island's power, its way of breaking me. But it's not working. The light, the truth, it's still ahead of me, just beyond the fog. And I'm not going to stop. I can feel it now, this is it. The island has given me one last chance to escape, or perhaps it's just testing how far I'm willing to go, pushing me to the very edge of my sanity. I can't tell anymore. All I know is that the fog is closing in, suffocating me, and I'm running out of time. Running out of breath. The trees around me seem to pulse, their shadows thickening, bending in unnatural ways. The ground shakes beneath my feet as I take off, my legs heavy, my breath ragged. Every step I take, the island shifts, warps, and changes. The landscape twists like a nightmare, and the air is thick with the unmistakable scent of decay. I stumble over uneven ground, but I don't stop. I can't stop. I hear the whispers again, louder now, echoing from all directions, their voices a chorus of forgotten souls, each one more desperate than the last. You can't outrun it. Give in. It's too late. Come back to us. They claw at my mind, digging deep into my memories, pulling at the very core of who I am. The fog grows thicker, becoming a suffocating blanket, wrapping itself around me like hands, pulling me back toward the heart of the island. It's as though the island itself is alive, reaching out to claim me, to drag me back into its eternal cycle. I fight against it. My arms flail out, pushing through the fog, feeling the cold air bite into my skin. But the more I fight, the stronger the pull becomes. The shadows close in, flickering at the edges of my vision, just out of reach, but they're always there, always watching. They're waiting for me to collapse, waiting for me to give in. Then, the ground cracks beneath me. The earth trembles violently, and I fall to my knees, my hands sinking into the soft, damp earth. I try to push myself up, but my limbs feel like lead, my body fighting against the very will to move. The island is winning. It's always winning. I can see it now, the darkness at the edge of my vision, creeping in from the corners of my mind. My thoughts are starting to fray, unraveling, slipping away from me like sand through my fingers. The island is feeding on my fear, on my desperation. It's consuming me, piece by piece, eroding everything that makes me who I am. I close my eyes for a moment, trying to steady my breath, but even in the darkness behind my eyelids, I can see the island. I can feel it breathing, the pulse of the earth, the heartbeat that matches my own. It's pulling me in, drawing me closer to its core, to the heart of its power. I don't know how much longer I can fight. I open my eyes, and that's when I see it. The shadow. It's not just a flicker now. It's solid, massive, looming before me like a black hole. It's no longer a trick of the light or the fog. It's real. The shadow moves closer, its form shifting and twisting, becoming something more than just a figure. It's a reflection of everything I fear, everything I've tried to outrun. A face. My own face. It's staring at me from the depths of the shadow, its eyes wide with terror, its expression twisted in agony. But it's not me, not really. It's the version of me that the island wants to make me into. The version of me that will be lost forever, just another soul trapped in this never-ending nightmare. I scream, but no sound escapes my lips. The shadow leans closer, its hand, no, my hand, reaching out toward me, its fingers twitching like they're trying to touch me, to pull me in. I stumble backward, heart pounding, but my legs give way beneath me. I fall to the ground, my chest heaving, the fog swirling around me in a dizzying whirl. The shadow is above me now, its weight crushing, suffocating, as I lie on the cold earth. You can't escape, it whispers, its voice a cold, mocking echo of my own. The island has found my breaking point. I try to scream again, but I can't. The fog is in my lungs, thick and choking. The ground feels like it's opening beneath me, pulling me into the dark, into the void. I claw at the earth, but it's no use. The shadows are closing in, the fog swirling tighter, and I feel myself being dragged down, swallowed whole by the island. I know I should give up. I know that I've lost. There's no way out. The island has broken me, shattered my mind, my spirit. All of it. I can feel it now. Every fiber of my being is unraveling, slipping through my fingers. There's nothing left. But then, in the chaos, a flicker of clarity. For a moment, the fog clears. I can see the sky above me, a glimpse of blue breaking through the murk. It's not much, just a sliver, a brief breath of air, but it's enough. I don't know how or why, but I push myself up again. My body feels numb, like it's not my own, but I push forward. One step, then another. The fog tries to drag me back, but I fight it. With everything I have, I fight it. I can hear the whispers again, louder now, more frantic, but I don't listen. The shadow reaches for me, its fingers brushing against my arm, but I tear myself free, running, my heart hammering in my chest. I don't know where I'm going. I don't know how I'll survive this. But I won't stop. I won't let the island take me. Not yet. Not today. The island is winning. I can feel it now, the full force of its power bearing down on me. Every step I take feels heavier than the last, as if the very earth beneath my feet is trying to drag me down into the depths of the island's twisted core. The fog thickens, swirling around me like a living thing, its tendrils reaching out, clawing at my skin, pulling me into the depths of the nightmare. I try to push forward, but the air grows colder, the weight of the island pressing down on me from all sides. My limbs feel heavy, sluggish, as though the island is draining the very strength from my body. Each breath comes harder than the last, my chest tight, the air thick and suffocating. Time, too, seems to warp and bend around me. The seconds stretch into infinity, and the moments blur together, each one indistinguishable from the last. It's as if reality itself is coming apart at the seams. I glance up at the sky, hoping for some sign that I'm still connected to the world outside this hellish island, but all I see is a swirling mass of clouds, a vortex of darkness and fog. The sky shifts and bends, its colors bleeding into each other, and I can't tell where the horizon ends and the ground begins. The island has taken everything, the land, the sky, the very fabric of time itself, and twisted it into something unrecognizable. The whispers return, louder now, pressing in from all sides. They claw at my thoughts, distorting my mind, bending my perception of reality. They aren't just voices anymore, they're sensations, feelings, everything I've ever feared, all wrapped up in an endless chorus of despair. Give in, they chant. You cannot escape. You never could. I stagger, my feet slipping in the fog, and my vision blurs. The island is everywhere, inside me, around me. It's consuming me, pulling me deeper into its grasp, and I can feel my mind fracturing, shattering like glass. The edges of my memories are blurring, slipping away from me, and I can't hold on to anything. The past, the present, and the future are collapsing into one indistinguishable moment of confusion. I try to speak, but my voice is swallowed by the thick air. I try to scream, to fight against the pull, but it's useless. The island is so vast, so powerful, and I am nothing in comparison. My thoughts begin to twist and warp, no longer my own. I see glimpses of other people, ghostly figures, lost souls wandering the fog, their faces twisted in terror. They reach for me, their arms outstretched, begging for release, but there's nothing I can do. They are as trapped as I am. The ground shakes beneath me again, and I fall to my knees. The island trembles with a low, rumbling growl, a deep sound that resonates through the very bones of the earth. The fog is thickening, swirling faster, and I can feel the pressure in the air building, like the island is about to collapse in on itself. And then, I see it. A rift in the fog. It's not just a crack in the mist, it's a tear in reality itself, a jagged wound that cuts through the island, revealing a space beyond, something ancient, something primal. It's a place that shouldn't exist, a void where time and space have no meaning. It's the heart of the island, the core of its power, and I can feel it pulling me toward it. I can feel the weight of it, the gravity of that dark void, and I know that if I step into it, I'll be lost forever. The whispers grow louder, more insistent. Come closer. Come to the heart. It is where you belong. But I can't. I won't. I try to stand, to break free from the pull of the rift, but my body is numb, unresponsive. I can't move. I'm rooted to the spot, frozen in the grip of the island's power. The rift is widening, the darkness within it swallowing everything around me. The shadows are stretching out from it, tendrils of pure darkness that reach for me, wrapping around my legs, pulling me toward the rift's insatiable maw. I know now what this island is, what it has always been. It is a prison, a place where time and space cease to exist, where souls are trapped in an eternal cycle, forever caught in the island's grasp. And I am no different. I am just another lost soul, caught in the web of this cursed place. The island's influence is complete. I can feel it now, deep within me, erasing everything I once knew, consuming every fragment of my identity. The island is all I am, and I am all it is. I close my eyes, my breath shallow, my body trembling. The darkness is closing in, the rift pulling me toward it. I can feel the cold embrace of the void, the endless nothingness that awaits me. And yet, somewhere deep within, a flicker of defiance remains. A small spark of resistance, a final refusal to let the island win. I know what I must do. With everything I have left, I push forward. My feet move, stumbling, dragging me away from the rift. The fog fights me, wrapping around my legs, trying to pull me back. The island roars in fury, its power growing stronger, but I push harder, my body screaming, my mind shattered. And then, for a fleeting moment, the fog clears. The rift closes. The shadows disappear. The island falls silent. I stand there, panting, my heart hammering in my chest, unsure of where I am, unsure of what's real. But I know one thing. I've escaped. Or at least, I think I have. The island has let go of me, but it hasn't released me. I stand there, breathing heavily, my limbs trembling as the fog begins to lift. For a moment, I think I've made it. I've fought through the endless cycle. I've escaped the island's grasp. I should be free. I should be standing on the edge of the world, ready to return to reality. But something is wrong. I blink, trying to clear my vision, but the fog isn't really gone. It's just different. The air feels heavy again, a weight pressing down on me, as if the island is still watching, waiting for me to make a mistake. I take a step forward, but the ground beneath me feels wrong, the very texture of the earth shifting beneath my feet. I look down, and the ground is not solid but translucent, rippling like water, as though I'm walking on the surface of a glassy sea. A cold chill crawls up my spine. I glance over my shoulder, and there it is, just ahead in the distance, the island. It's not gone. It's not behind me. It's still there, looming in the distance, shrouded in fog, just as it was before. I swallow, my throat dry. This can't be real. I've been walking away from it. I saw the rift close. I should be free. But the fog thickens again, and I hear the whispers returning. The same voices. The same endless chant. Come back. You can't escape. You never left. A sharp, terrifying thought runs through my mind. Is this the island's final trick? Or am I still caught in its web, forever cycling through this endless loop? I try to run, but my feet won't move. My legs feel like they're sinking into the ground. The fog presses in, surrounding me once more, as if the island itself is closing in around me, trapping me once again. I look down, my reflection flickering in the distorted surface of the ground. But it's not me anymore. The face staring back at me is pale, unfamiliar, twisted with the same desperation I had felt earlier. It's my own, but somehow different, like a reflection in a shattered mirror. No, I whisper, stepping back. No, this can't be happening. But it is. The ground begins to tremble. The fog pulls tighter, and the whispers grow louder, more insistent. I spin in a circle, trying to find a way out, but there is nothing. There is only fog. Only the island. And I realize, too late, that the island is not just a place. It's a prison. A timeless trap. And I am part of it now. Part of its endless curse. My heartbeat accelerates, panic creeping in as I realize that I may never escape. The island doesn't just trap the body, it traps the soul over and over again until nothing remains of who I was. And I can feel it happening to me now. I am slipping away. The last fragments of my identity, of my memories, start to crumble, absorbed into the island's cursed existence. The fog begins to pull at me, dragging me backward. The whispers are now a scream in my mind, urging me to return, to accept my fate. I try to fight it, but the more I resist, the harder it pulls me in. And then, just as my legs give way, the fog closes around me completely. I am no longer in control. I don't know if I ever was. The last thing I hear before everything fades away is a voice, low and distorted, a voice that somehow feels familiar. Welcome home. And then, silence. Forever. This has been a long, dark journey through the night with Whisper Crowley. Thank you for staying with us until the end. Leave a like if these stories made you look at the darkness a little differently, and share in the comments what you enjoyed most or what gave you chills. Make sure to subscribe so you don't miss our next Sinister Whispers. Until we meet again in the world of shadows.